Lost an hour, not 10 years. March 13, 2023, this is a regular business meeting of the Billings City Council. If you would, please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance, and then Councilmember Owen is on for our invocation. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
March 13th is National Good Samaritan Day, so tonight's invocation is offered in recognition of this day. Heavenly Father, as we gather here tonight, we give thanks for your endless grace and mercy. For all that you have given us, you ask us but two simple yet powerful things: to love God with all our hearts and to love our neighbors as ourselves. And when we ask you, Lord, who is our neighbor, you give us the parable of the Good Samaritan. A man is robbed, left beaten and broken, near death on the side of the road. Two religious leaders walk by, crossing the road to avoid the man. And yet when the Samaritan, a stranger, a person considered to be ethnically and religiously inferior, passes this wounded man, this Good Samaritan stops to render aid. He cares for his neighbor without regard to the risks that the robbers are still near, the risks that he will be taken advantage of, the risk that he will be delayed on his way. He lifts the wounded man up and takes care of all his needs with the same love and grace that any of us would wish for if we were left injured on our journeys. I ask you, Lord, to press this story on our hearts tonight as we consider the needs of our neighbors here in Billings. Fill us with the spirit of the Good Samaritan. Cause us to stop in our busyness and see our neighbors in front of us. Bend us to lift up those who are wounded and in need. Move us to act without regard to our preferences, comfort, or standing. Open our eyes, shine your love through us tonight in our words and deeds. Give us wisdom to embrace our neighbors and serve them with glad and grateful hearts. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Tony, if you would call the roll, please.
Councilmember Shaw,
Excused.
Gulick,
Here.
Neese,
Here?
Owen,
Here.
Joy,
Present.
Tariki,
Here.
Tidswell,
Here.
Purinton, Boyette, Repsis, Mayor Cole.
Here. Council, we have our February 13th minutes for approval tonight. Are there any comments, changes, or is there a motion pertaining to our February 13 minutes? Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that we approve the minutes for February 13th, 2023 as read.
Second.
Motion made and seconded by Councilmember Neese. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Motion, if opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Council courtesies. Councilmember Purinton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council, I would like to introduce Michelle Harkins, the new eBird director, executive director. She wanted to come up, and I think she's visited with many of us on council. So, Michelle, welcome.
Thank you. I just wanted to come. Sorry. I just wanted to come. Oh, sorry. Thank you. I just wanted to come and introduce myself and say hi. I didn't want the first time for some of you to meet me when I was coming before you to present a TIF project, and just say hello and answer any questions you may have. So.
Welcome to the new gig. So,
thank you so much.
I look forward to working with you. I don't know if any council members have any questions or comments. If so,
we have a lot of exciting stuff coming along and projects coming down the pipeline in the eBird, and some that are infrastructure based. The Yellowstone ice and water plant is 7/8 complete. They're going to start having ice production coming out of there May 1st. And we have a lot more community-based projects getting the bird more involved in Billings as a whole as well, starting this year to hopefully see people see it in a new light over there as well. So I'm really excited for everything we have to come.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. Michelle, I do have a question for you. In the past, the eBird has brought some projects to us that are smaller dollar amounts, and specifically regarding fencing. And some of the recommendations, like what the Downtown Billings Association has, a couple of programs that the city approved that just says if you fit these criteria with their signs, then the downtown, or I'm sorry, the Downtown Association, TIF, can go ahead and approve those. I was wondering if you've heard about that as far as for your fencing requirements, because you require certain fencing. If you guys have talked about bringing a program to the council to approve that so that you guys can make those decisions on the fences and we just have, approved the outline for you.
Yes, yeah, we have discussed that, because that is basically a chunk of what our projects have been lately. So I will take that before my board and we can get something to present to you as well. We also have discussed reshaping our project Greenlight, because that still exists and that's still available, and we don't have as many participation coming forward with that now that the Lazy KT has been torn down, and we have had a reduction in crime in our area, which is an amazing, amazing accomplishment of our district. But we do have those funds available and we want to see them used so that crime continues to drop. But that is another thing that we'll probably present to you shortly, just so we can keep going on that trajectory.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Anything else from Michelle? Don't see any, so thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure meeting you all.
Bet, welcome aboard. We'll move on to our proclamation for AmeriCorps Week, if there aren't any other council courtesies. Don't see that. So we do have a proclamation this month, and I see we've got some AmeriCorps members with us, as well as at least one alum who goes back a few years. So our proclamation for AmeriCorps Week reads as follows. Whereas in 1963, President John F. Kennedy envisioned a national service corps to help provide urgently needed services in poverty areas. Less than 2 years later, Lyndon B. Johnson made Kennedy's dream a reality by launching the War on Poverty and welcoming the first group of VISTA volunteers after signing the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964. And whereas the city of Billings is required to implement anti-poverty initiatives to reduce the number of families experiencing poverty as a recipient of Community Development Block Grant funding. And in 2009, the city of Billings was chosen as an established site for the Billings Metro Vista project by the Corporation for National and Community Service to aid in poverty impact initiatives. And whereas the BMVP has hosted 272 members who have volunteered to impact poverty through activities designed to enhance economic opportunity, education, healthy futures, and services for veterans and military families at 58 organizations. Members have generated over $5.1 million in funding, and the value of human resources brings the total project value to well over $10.8 million. And whereas AmeriCorps Vista members are valuable contributors to the city's economy and have expended over $2.5 million locally to procure housing, provisions, and retail services. 32 members are originally from Montana, and other members have moved to Billings from 43 different states, including the District of Columbia. 40% of full-year members have chosen to reside, work, or pay taxes in Billings following their service, their volunteer service. And whereas the city of Billings welcomes this opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to AmeriCorps Vista program and its talented members and alums as they continue to work toward breaking the cycle of poverty in the Billings area. Now, therefore, I, William Cole, Mayor of the City of Billings, do hereby proclaim March 12 through 18 as AmeriCorps Week in our community. So with that, we have some volunteers with us, and I'm not sure if we've got an official introducer. Is that Carly, James, whoever wants to introduce, take it away. I'm sure you'd like to come to the podium and let us know who our new crop of AmeriCorps Vista members are.
Sure. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Carly Collins, and I'm a grants coordinator with the Community Development Division. I manage the AmeriCorps program, the BMVP, or Billings Metro Vista project. Tonight we have all of our members that are serving. One is online, and then 4 more here in person. So I will just introduce Daniel Seidel first, and he can tell you a little bit about himself.
Daniel, are you with us online?
Yes.
There you are. Go ahead.
As As was said before, my name is Daniel Seidel. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. I attended Cedarville University and got my bachelor's in mechanical engineering. And then I attended Cleveland State University for post-baccalaureate in medical studies. I'm serving with Mountain Health Gives in Helena, Montana, an organization dedicated to serving Montanans who need help accessing the healthcare system. Right now, the overall goal of my project is to do a community health needs assessment for the state of Montana to inform future initiatives, build an application process for people seeking our service, and build awareness in the community and amongst providers to garner funds, as well as create a referral network to really enhance our services.
All right, well, welcome to Montana. Get over to Billings sometimes. All right, thank you, Daniel. Next.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Stanton. I'm an AmeriCorps Vista serving with the Billings Police Department's Family Violence Task Force. My supervisor is Officer Katie Nash, and we are working on building a Family Justice Center in Billings. What is a Family Justice Center? A Family Justice Center is a co-location of all of the different services that a city or state provides for victims of family violence, such as child abuse, elder abuse, domestic violence, sexual violence, and often, as we see, familial human trafficking. I am honored to answer any other questions about the Family Justice Center model. I have compiled 11 different folders with information that describes the Family Justice Center model and its effectiveness of reducing domestic-related homicides in the cities in which they reside. For example, the first Family Justice Center was started in San Diego, California in the late 1990s, and in just under 3 years, it reduced domestic-related homicides by 95%, which is huge. I believe we need this in Billings. I am looking for your support. I'm sure I will be sending you emails and phone calls for the entire next year in which my service continues. So thank you again.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. Where are you from?
Right, I forgot that part. I'm from Southwest Colorado in a rural town called Buena Vista. I went to the University of Colorado Boulder and double majored in international affairs and environmental studies. And I'm currently studying for the LSAT to apply to law school for the following year. So if you have any advice on that, I would also really appreciate it.
Just don't do it. Councilmember Gulick, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for providing this. And I've just cursory glance just saw that there was a what question to just, a why and a how, but how about a where? Where would the Family Justice Center, are we looking to have it set up?
That is a great question. That will be a further issue for City Council to perhaps decide. Right now, I'm working on bringing in the Family Justice Alliance, which is the national nonprofit that sees all family justice centers nationally and internationally, actually. And they provide a consulting service in which they come into a city and they tell us exactly where is your Family Justice Center going to be located. These are who you need to support your Family Justice Center. These are your funding streams. These are the services that you have to include.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, next.
All right. Good evening. My name is Laura Kebke, and I am from Fairfax, Virginia, where I attended George Mason University, graduating in 2022 with a degree in creative writing. I serve at Chinook Courses here in Billings. Chinook Courses offers equine therapy to individuals and families who struggle with mental health and substance abuse disorders, with the goal of breaking the cycle of trauma, abuse, addiction, and poverty in the community through the building of positive relationships with equine animals. As an AmeriCorps Vista, my role in the organization is to help Chinook Courses build their capacity to serve the community by creating and updating outreach materials, organizing fundraising efforts, and assisting with other basic behind-the-scenes tasks that help keep Chinook courses up and running for the benefit of our clients. I'm very passionate about the work I do with Chinook courses because I believe that creating healthy community members strengthens the health of our community overall.
Thank you. Laura, welcome. Next.
Hi, I'm Skylar McGee. So originally I'm from Boston, Massachusetts. I went to Connecticut College, which is in Connecticut, and I received a bachelor's in neuroscience when I was there. So currently I'm serving with Homefront, and I'm helping out with their housing strategy for Billings. They used to be the Housing Authority in Billings, but they rebranded. But our major goal with this project is to focus on community development and economic opportunity, specifically spreading awareness and availability of affordable housing for the Billings community. So some highlights for current projects that I'm working on. We're working on 3D housing projects in the Heights, which is really cool. We get to see how that's done in certain projects, but it's going to be the first 3D printed housing in all of Montana, which is really exciting, super cool. And then we're also using recycled modular units that used to be used as kind of campsites during COVID to create 100 affordable housing units also in the Heights. And then I'm also trying to get a little creative with it, and I started an educational program-ish, and I'm working on a timeline that's hopefully going to be exhibited in public areas. First, we're trying for the public library, but it's just going to go through the timeline for affordable housing. So it's pretty exciting and cool just to spread awareness and understanding of it. But yeah, that's what I've been working on. Thank you.
Great. Welcome to Billings. Anybody else?
Good evening, Council. So my name is Natalie Blue, and I grew up in St. Louis, and I went to school at Kansas City Art Institute. So this is my first time living outside of Missouri, and I'm very excited about it. I love Montana. I received a Bachelor of Fine Arts. My specialty was sculpture. I received a minor in entrepreneurial studies and a certificate in art studies, Asian art studies. And I am currently serving at the Yellowstone Art Museum, where the goal of my project is to overall help the access of art education for underserved communities and make sure that everyone can enjoy art and be able to view our art over at the Yellowstone Art Museum. So recently I have been helping to create and promote the YAM's first Urban Sketchers event. It'll be on the 18th. It's free with admission, 11 to 4. It's open to all ages, and it'll be a day of different workshops, learning how to sketch, and it'll be a lot of fun. So I'm hoping to see you there.
Great. Sounds like a great project. And that's all of our volunteers. I believe, Councilmember Joy, you have the privilege of serving with a slightly older version of our current volunteers.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'd just like to introduce Jim Corson. He was way back in the day, served as a Peace Corps, not an AmeriCorps Vista, but as a Peace Corps officer, and has been involved with the Vistas over many, many decades. So please come forward and give us a few words of wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council, Denise. Actually, I was a Vista volunteer, not Peace Corps. Back then, it was Vista. That was way back then. I came to Montana 52 and a half years ago as a Vista volunteer over on the Crow Reservation, which, as you know, is right next door. And after that, I came to Billings, loved the place. I was married. Well, I got married and have children and the grandkids, and I have stayed here. And probably for the past 8 years, I have served on your CD board here in town, and my terms and my time is coming to an end in the fall. Next fall, this fall, I guess. But I'm here to thank you for your continued support of the Metro Vista program. This program has been nationally recognized for years as an outstanding program. And the credit, a lot of it goes to the city council and the staff. It's a wonderful program here in town. It has raised a lot of dollars, other volunteers have. Thanks to Brenda and her staff, we have brought in wonderful Vista volunteers, wonderful young people who have served here in the town and like other towns too, like Red Lodge and Helena and places like that. But it's a wonderful program, and other places have like Vista programs, but sometimes local government isn't all that, into it. Not the case here. The city government has been a strong backer of it, and the city council, and the mayor, and Chris. They like speak at like every Vista orientation. When we bring in new Vista volunteers, they have a week-long orientation. Everyone, you got the mayor and you got Chris. And before Chris, we had his like predecessor. And before the mayor, Tom was at all of them. And it just shows as they like come here from every place, they're wondering, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And it's so good to have our local leaders like welcome them here in town. So once again, thank you Denise, for allowing me to speak tonight. Thank you, Mayor, and that's it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you for your service. Thank you, Vista volunteers, for your service. And almost 50% of the Vista members who come decide to stay in Billings, which is quite a testament, I think, to them and their commitment, and also to our community. A little plug here. We do have a vacancy on the Community Development Board. So if anybody's out there and is interested in serving, get your application in. You just need to come from low and moderate income portion of a city, which is roughly most of our city core. So keep that in mind. So, and Vista members, you're welcome to stay as long as you want or leave at any time. So we'll continue then with our meeting. Council reports, anything from groups that we serve on behalf of the council? Councilmember Purington.
I just wanted to let everyone know, council knows, that the executive director report from Big Sky EDA was sent via email to each of you.
Very good. Thank you, Councilmember Joy and Councilmember Denise.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This month, the Community Development Board met and really worked at how they were going to present to us tonight. So you will see and hear what they actually worked on in this month's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Denise.
Thank you, Mayor. I think after the legislators were in town this week, they spoke here, but they also were able to, we had Senator Zonikoff and Representative Brewster and Ekowich able to come to our legislative committee meeting and have a little more personal communication between us and staff about some of the bills that are passing. So hopefully they'll help and hear us and carry some of the wishes of Billings and the city and staff there to Helena. So we continue to meet on Wednesdays throughout the legislation sessions, and so the public is welcome Wednesday night at 4 o'clock, although please watch the calendar this Wednesday. I think we have some conflicts with our schedule, so we may not meet this coming week.
Okay, thank you. Any other council reports? Don't see any. Our city administrator, Chris Kulski.
Mayor and Council, I actually just have two brief ones. So consent agenda item 1B1. Apologize, we had an inconsistency between the agenda and the actual memo, this item 1B1. It should have read, looks like the memo is correct, but the agenda didn't identify it correctly. It should read in our recommendation that zones 1A to 3B, I think we were inconsistent, 3A, 3B. It should be 3B, 4 and 5 is what that should have been. So when you make a motion to approve consent, you'd make that correction, or if you want to separate it, make that correction. Apologize for the lack of clarity there. And then the second item was there are no ex parte items in the notebook in front of you.
Thank you, Chris. I'll separate that just so there's no doubt and we can create a clear record on that item 1B1. We'll move on to the consent agenda then. Council, do we have any separations besides? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. Public comment on the non-public hearing items. Tonight, that is items 1, the consent agenda, and item 3, which is the Comanche Park funding allocation change. We'll have a public hearing later on item number 2, the home ARP allocation plan. But if you'd like to comment on item 1 or item 3, this is your opportunity. We just ask that you come to the podium and tell us your name and address and keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. So do we have any public comment on items 1 or 3? Before I close public comment, nobody is standing up. No one is online. If you are online and have anything to comment, just raise your hand so we can track that. Council, if you see somebody with their hand up, please let me know. But no one's coming forward, so we'll close the public comment period. Move on to our consent agenda. Do we have any other separations? Okay. If we, Councilmember Bernice, do we have a motion for the non-separated items?
Yes, I make a motion to approve the items of the consent agenda as submitted, with the exception of the items moved for separation.
Second, Councilmember Purington. Any discussion? Okay, we'll proceed to a vote. The motion is for approval of the non-separated items. If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. The only separated item then is what you just heard Chris describe, item 1B1. The agenda incorrectly references the work order dealing with 3A, and it should be 3B. Is there a motion? Councilmember Bernice.
I move to approve the staff recommendation. The City Council approve a contract for work order 23-01, contract 2023 sewer main replacement zones 1A, 2, 3B, 4, and 5 to Western Municipal Construction in the amount of $3,114,566.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Boyette indicates a second. Any discussion? Okay, we'll proceed to a vote. Motion is for approval, item 1B1 as specified. If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. That concludes item 1. Brings us to item 2 of our regular agenda. Tony, would you read item 2?
Item number 2, public hearing and amendment to the FY 21-22 Annual Action Plan and approval of the Home ARP Allocation Plan. Staff and Community Development Board recommends approval.
Thank you very much. I think Carly is going to be our eventual presenter, but Wyeth, you've got some intro here.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and Council. And I guess just real quick, Tony, we're trying to share the screen, and now it says that it's prevented. So if you can help us with that, we'll get the presentation up real quick. And all I wanted to do, Mayor and Council, is Carly obviously introduced herself for the VISTA program, but Carly has been spearheading this effort on the Home ARP program with our Community Development Manager, Brenda Beckett, the last many months, as you'll see in the presentation. And she's going to give your presentation this evening. So thanks.
Very good. Then Carly, you can take it away while your IT expert brings up the magic machine.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, good evening again. Thank you for having me. Like I said, I'm a grants coordinator with the Community Development Division. And I'm here tonight regarding the public hearing on the substantial amendment to the fiscal year 21-22 annual action plan. So we're looking for action from council tonight to approve the home ARP allocation plan via that substantial amendment. And this will ensure that the city meets HUD's submission deadline, which has been set for March 31st. The allocation plan outlines recommendations to use the home ARP funding, and these recommendations include a strategy for making the most impact with this funding in combination with existing funding sources to best address our community health and safety needs. Next slide, please. So tonight's presentation, I will provide a brief overview of home ARP funding and allocation plan requirements, a timeline to summarize staff's development of its home ARP allocation plan, a review of some data findings from the city's survey and its consultation process with the public, and staff and community development board's recommendations for funding activities with home ARP, as well as the considerations that were made through this process. Finally, next steps will be taken in order to implement the most financially viable, significant impact on our community and be compliant with federal guidelines. So the home ARP, or American Rescue Plan's total award in Billings is just over $1.2 million. This allocation was calculated using the home program allocation formula, which actually means Billings is one of the smallest funding recipients of this funding in the nation. We're number 611 out of 664. So home ARP is also highly regulatory. The structure is limiting when it comes to how activities are implemented, monitored, and carried out. Staff recognizes that the overall intent of home ARP is to invest in supportive services, rental housing, and non-congregate shelter. And these eligible activities include funding things like mental health services, substance abuse treatment, rental assistance, food, case management, etc. Additionally, the development of rental housing and non-congregate shelter are eligible activities as well. Okay. Perfect. So home ARP funds must benefit all qualifying populations, which are up on the screen here. These include individuals and families that are experiencing homelessness, at risk of homelessness, fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, human trafficking, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, etc. And other vulnerable populations that are at greatest risk of housing instability, which include households that are severely housing cost burdened or paying more than 50% of their income towards housing. In addition, this is all, any veterans or families that include a veteran family member as well. Okay, so the big question here really is, how can Billings, which is a small community with limited ARP dollars, utilize this funding to benefit all of those qualifying populations, which it must do, while really supporting the many organizations that serve them actively in our town? So a little about our timeline as far as our allocation plan development goes. It's required to follow a certain format and address several aspects of both community need and participation. So it included both a public outreach and a community needs assessment and gaps analysis, and a recommendation for funding usage. So HUD even provided a plan template, basically, you don't have to use it, but you really should. So we decided that direct contact with our providers as well as a survey to gather that information as required by HUD would be the most effective way to get that. So we developed that and released it on October 12th. And then October 31st rolled around and HUD finally publishes a deadline for when allocation plans are due, which is March 31st of the following year, or this year. We set a survey deadline of November 14th, and we mailed out the survey in addition to emailed it to over 80 service providers in Billings. By mid-November, there were some key stakeholders that had not yet submitted survey responses, and knowing that this agency data would be integral to our allocation plan, I extended the survey deadline to November 18th at that time. We held a public information session at the library on December 16th, where the Community Development Division discussed all of our programs, as well as home ARP, and other activities that could be included with those as well. Data that we needed still had not been gathered by that time. despite continuous contact with some of the agencies. So final extension was given to have all of that data gathered by December 30th. So this, pushed back our allocation plan writing about 6 weeks. On February 21st, CD Board had their allocation plan draft and reviewed this. It was posted, the plan was posted on February 25th, and public comment began. On March 7th, at the CD Board's regular monthly meeting, they reviewed and provided their recommendations for the drafted allocation plan. Tonight's public hearing will provide an opportunity for staff to gather and consider any additional comments to include with the allocation plan. As a result of public feedback, the public comment period was moved back to March 20th. It was initially set for March 13th, so it's now March 20th. And again, our allocation plan is due to HUD March 31st. Following approval of our plan, we as staff will develop policies, procedures, and an application process as well. So I'd like to review some of the findings that were revealed through our staff survey from local agencies. In total, 26 agencies responded to the survey, and at least 17 of those organizations serve at least one or more of the qualifying populations as described in the Home ARP program. All of the qualifying populations I described earlier exhibited need through that survey and will benefit from this funding. So the top priority identified was the provision of supportive services, and you'll see here they're tiered in kind of a first, second, third. So the first priority needs identified through service providers was mental health services, substance abuse treatment, and case management to access housing. The next identified priority, of course, is affordable, transitional, and supportive housing units. There are some givens with our survey and data collection that need to be addressed as well. So it's important to note that, as I mentioned earlier, the allocation plan must adhere to a specific format and is developed by HUD. So understanding this, we're aware that the plan is not able to address all of the community needs. There are limitations on the type of activities as well as the kind of populations that can be served. So in fact, the definition of homelessness has even been changed by HUD within this program to accommodate the nature of it. Staff also noted in the plan that HUD is looking for specific demographics on these identified populations. So not how many times someone was served, but what individuals were served. So it wouldn't be how many meals someone got, it's how many people got one meal for that whole year and was served by that agency. The recommendations from staff and the CD Board are based on home ARP eligible activities only, so it's not a full array of what might need to actually be addressed in the community. Staff also made every effort to really gather the most updated and relevant data to guide the mandatory assessment and gaps analysis here. However, a key factor to recognize really is that comprehensive data sets for these qualifying populations simply don't exist. So HUD provided recommendations on data to use, and their data recommendations ultimately predate the coronavirus. So any coronavirus impacts are not even quantified in their data. Additionally, census data, when it comes to creating our analysis, our housing analysis and shelter gaps analysis is the newest version of that is 2018 and 2019. So staff used the recommended HUD data, of course, such as point in time counts, information from local and state continuum of care, census data, and then a local study that was performed by the local continuum of care as well. And then the city survey was kind of the icing on the cake to gather the rest of the information, not able to be through the others. Like I said, some agencies may have not had the data sets or data tools to collect and report on data that we needed for the specific activities. And we do have that noted in the plan where there may have been some discrepancy there. We have that in the appendices, so you can see where that happened. Also important to note that just the number of individuals or families served is what may have been duplicated. Any of the other data was not duplicated by the agencies. So really, HUD's vision for Home ARP was to provide enough funding to build housing and or non-congregate shelter and provide services for each community. So in a larger community where they're receiving a large allocation, this might work. So unfortunately, in a community the size of Billings with a relatively small funding award, this is not as feasible. So the overall recommendation in the plan is to address all of the Home ARP activities, however, not just with Home ARP funds. So this will include the provision of supportive services and the support of rental housing development and shelter development. The strategy for ensuring that the funding has the greatest impacts will come down to the utilization of all funding sources, which include community development block grant funds and home funds. So as you can see this outlined here, supportive services can be funded with Home ARP, rental housing can be supported through CDBG and home, and non-congregate shelter, as well as congregate shelter, could be funded through CDBG. Congregate shelter is not an eligible activity through Home ARP. With this strategy, all populations can benefit. Developers will have more freedom to create projects that are viable and work for them, and really the city's financial investment will be more secure. So with as many as 17 organizations, of course, serving these vulnerable populations, an open competitive funding application process will be established and carried out. So this is just another breakdown of how the funding sources can support the actual activities. So really here, community health and safety is a combination of services and housing. So we're meeting the overall intent just with a combination of new Home ARP funding and existing home and CDBG funding. So staff and CD board's recommendations and considerations here. So why fund just supportive services with Home ARP? You'll see here the chart on the right shows the top priorities for services. So mental health services, substance abuse treatment, and accessing housing to case management, like I've mentioned before, and then the services just go down from there. So really we could take the $969,000 and allocate it for agencies that are already doing this amazing work in our community and supporting them and just bulking that up. So with that money, we can serve all of the qualifying populations. We can have till 2030 to expend this. And then just on the flip side, when we're looking at CDBG funding, their cap is at $120,000 for services, whereas Home ARP could go up to $969,000. So additionally, why is the recommendation to not develop housing shelter with Home ARP funding? So using a HUD-provided calculation sheet and inputting our funding resources, Billings can really only develop 3 units with this fund. When that comes into play, these units must be monitored for 15 years and ensure financial viability. So 70% of these units must house people in the qualifying populations who may not have the means to pay rent. This means that they would be subsidized by the city, and the city is also on the hook for ongoing operating costs. Within these units, you must serve all of the qualifying populations as well, not just one, not just two, all. Another important factor here is affordable housing applications. The city has not received any applications that have come to fruition since 2019. Any non-compliance with those terms I just described, of course, would lead to the city repaying the full award amount if that occurred within the first 10 years. And then in year 11 through 15 would be reduced for 20% each year, but still a significant amount of money there. You'll see just a breakdown here of the total allocation and what it would look like if Home ARP was used to fund housing or shelter units. This is using a HUD-prescribed calculation, of course, so there would be just over $720,000 for an initial development of rental or shelter units. HUD has also set the limit of ongoing cost assistance to just over $181,000, and this would have to last for 15 years. So when we're subsidizing costs, as the city would likely have to do, this is not much money to do so. In the end, any deficit of these costs would be the city's responsibility. So just to reiterate our recommendations here, it is to continue the housing strategy by offering the city's existing affordable housing development program to develop rental and or shelter units. Currently, we have just over $193,000 in CDBG funds and $1 million in home funds that is available for housing developers to apply for. The proposed funding for the new fiscal year is about $309,000 in CDBG and over $683,000 in home, which more will be coming to you next month regarding those allocations. This brings the total combined funding for potential housing development to over $2.2 million. So these are not specifically tied to qualifying populations either, like home ARP would be. So again, we believe that to best meet city priorities and address community health and safety, an allocation of home ARP and supportive services and housing development using existing funding is going to make the most meaningful impact in our community, as we can support all eligible activities that way. It's okay. It's okay. So our next steps would be for City Council to review and approve our allocation plan so it can be submitted to HUD for review and approval there. Again, program development such as policy and procedures, forms, reporting and monitoring processes, application development, release, and review of any applications that are received will first go through our Community Development Board and then would come to you for final review and approval of final allocations. Of course, implement ongoing monitoring, federal reporting, through the expenditure deadline of September 2030.
Is that it?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you very much, Carly. And to the whole Community Development Division for working on the report. It's very lengthy. I recommend to members of the public, if you haven't seen it, to read it because it's very educational about all of the different organizations in our community that are working to attack the problem of homelessness. So I know I learned a lot. So it's a very good resource. So council, questions for Carly? This is a public hearing opportunity, so we'll have that soon. But let's start off with any questions for Carly before we open it up. Councilmember Boyette and Councilmember, no?
Thank you, Mayor. This may be kind of naive, but the number one issue is mental health. Why not just put all the money towards mental health if that's the number one issue? Realizing, that $1.2 million is a lot of money, but it isn't when you're building homes anymore or structures. Why not just put it all in one pot rather than spread it out? That's just a question.
So it technically could. So any organizations are able to apply for this funding. So if one organization only applies and says we want $969,000 for mental health services, then we could, move forward at looking at that their eligibility there.
Councilor Rupsis? Okay. Councilmember Owen, Councilmember Neese?
I'm puzzled by the housing analysis where you said you could only do 3 units. Why would it be necessary that you do them all fully funded with these dollars? Why not use these dollars to leverage additional investment? Because I think that's what you've done historically.
So, Brenda, do you want to take over? Sure. Okay.
Mayor and City Council, Councilmember Owen, we absolutely could do that.
Okay.
The issue that you have with developing these units is that 70% of the occupants and tenants of these units will most likely not be able to pay rent. Typically, whenever we've put together structured subsidy layering, tenants are able to pay rent, and developers can work on the pro forma for those dollars to support the development of those projects over, let's say, a 15-year affordability period, for example, or a 20-year affordability period. This funding requires the housing owners to rent without requiring people to pay rent. So 70% of those tenants would not be required to pay rent. There are people experiencing homelessness, at risk of homelessness. They're fleeing fleeing disastrous situations. It's a very fragile population. So that has to be subsidized. And so if you look at the housing slide that HUD has for their production calculator, they've got a little tiny $181,000 support for capital investments, for paying rent that wasn't paid in order to keep the project going. If at any period of time within a 10 to 15 year period, depending on if you're doing shelter units or rental units, that there's a deficit, the city would be required, they would consider it, HUD would consider it a failed project, and the city would be required to pay back that $1.2 million. So the city's kind of on the hook for making sure that this project is financially viable for that entire, what they call a set period. They don't call it an affordability period, it's just an established qualifying period. So that's the difference between, this project versus other projects that we've had.
Just to follow up, I'm not sure, Brenda, that I'm totally following what you're saying. Is there something unique about the HUD rules that have changed that would make these units not eligible, for example, for vouchers to address the rental issue?
They could.
Okay,
They could
so
absolutely do that.
This fund is like funds that have been used before to build units and layer them with vouchers. There's no difference.
There's a huge difference.
So that's what I'm not following.
Right. So the qualifying population requirement, 30% of the units could be developed just like we've developed all other kinds of units.
At market rate, with or without vouchers?
At fair market rate.
Exactly.
Affordable to 80% of the area median income. The area median income for this other qualifying population, they first look to see if people are qualified based on the 4 qualifying populations. So there has to be some established assessment process to get them qualified there. And then they had us do an analysis of 30% of the area median income and 50% of the area median income. Those 2 population groups cannot pay fair market rent. If they can pay any rent. And so if you look at the home ARP regulation, there's tons of language in there that says you need to make sure that you've rewritten all of your subsidy layering guidelines to be able to afford to make up the difference in this housing, production, whatever housing project that's put together. We need to be able to figure that out in advance. And that includes a very critical year, around year 10, year 11, when you have to do capital replacement costs. So the cost of all of your appliances for those units, the roof for those units, hot water heater, you have flooring costs, those kinds of costs. So you're not only dealing with a really fragile population, there just isn't income to be able to support the affordability of the project or the financial viability for that entire 15-year period.
If the city did it directly, is what you're saying?
If anyone does it. If we put out an RFP and an organization says, yes, we want to serve these populations, then they need to commit to this 15-year period. If it's new construction, it's 10 years. If it's a rehab, they need to commit to providing that shelter care or rental housing care for the qualified populations and having us review their we do not, outside of like an affirmative marketing plan, we've never gotten to the business of making sure that a housing provider is looking at some kind of a clinical assessment to get people qualified. And then, diving into their finances, if they have financial information available, we need to look at how they got referred to that process. We need to look at every household that was denied for those projects. I mean, this is something we typically are pretty married to housing organizations that we fund, but never to this extreme level, never to this level. And let's say they don't have tons of money in the bank to serve this population. We either need to repay HUD or we need to come up with additional non-federal funding to keep that project viable. Which is really difficult.
Councilmember Neeson-Ripsis?
Thank you, Mayor. Brenda, just a quick question, because I was concerned about some of the same questions that Jennifer had, but you mentioned that you could take 30% of the money and do what you normally did with it. So do I understand that correctly? Or are you saying if we use any of the money, we're tied to these QP, I think, qualified population?
Yeah, it's every dollar is tied to the qualifying population. So If you only develop 3 units, that's over, 70% would be all 3 units. Let's say you developed 10 units and you had other kinds of subsidy layering that was able to, let's say you do 10 units, seven of those units would be QP.
I think you answered my question. I was just asking if we only took 30% of the money to do housing, that would, even though you said 30% of housing, we could do that, I thought you said it wouldn't be subject to the qualified population, but you say it is actually subject to the qualified population if we only use 30% of the money.
Correct.
Okay.
All of the home ARP money has to serve the qualifying population. So at that point, you're trying to find an organization that will serve all those qualifying populations with those units.
Okay, and if we spend it on, I'm sorry, Mayor, quick follow-up on this?
Sure.
So if we spend it on the services, there is no requirement. I mean, they still get to spend on the qualified population, but it's the organization's responsibility to make sure that they're qualified population. Is that correct? Not the city?
The city still has to follow up and make sure that the qualifying population clinical assessment is met. We have to do that for every dollar of this funding. It's just more difficult with the housing piece because of the financial liability at the end of every year.
So, Mayor, if you don't mind?
Okay.
So is the city on the hook then if one of these organizations doesn't do the assessment like they're supposed to do and we have given them money?
Absolutely, we're on the hook for that.
So then we probably don't want to support or give this money to any organizations who's not going to play by whatever higher requirements are for these qualified population. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Rupsis.
Thank you, Mayor. Just had a question. If we're going to give this money out to support services, well-needed services in the community, under $1 million, presumably our service providers will hire people to provide those services, otherwise they'd already be doing that. And this is not that many years worth of salary for that many people. It just doesn't seem sustainable. We might get a couple years at the most, and then the service providers will be on the hook to come up with budget some other way? Is that just how this world works?
It does. Now, let's say we're a larger community and we got $20 million. Herein, we could do 10 units. We could do 20 units with that. We could do 20 units with half of that money, for example, and we could do 70% of those units for qualifying populations. We'd have enough money to subsidize the non-paying rent situation. We could pay for the services during that period of time. For 15 years, we could do that with $20 million, but we're at the bottom of that allocation. So we do not have that. I don't think that anything we could put together would be sustainable, which is why we would love to do affordable housing development with our other funding, so that if a service provider is coming in and they're saying, we're going to do 20 units and we want to do 2 of those for qualifying populations or people who are fleeing domestic violence or people who are, experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness, then, we could actually support that with social services as well to kind of wrap around. But then the developer gets to decide that they can make it financially viable another way, because the balance of those units would be paid for with people that are paying rent. So they get to do a development that they feel like is financially viable instead of us requiring them to do a project that cannot be financially viable without ongoing support from the city. That makes sense? So when you listen to the HUD webinars, they're saying, yes, and you have plenty of money to do this, and you can pay 100% of construction costs with this. And I'm thinking, we're just heartbroken because we have $1 million. And I'm like, that will not pay for very many units. And then you have to, then you're all over this qualifying population thing, and it makes it really financially unstable. I've never looked at a HUD project like this before. I've never looked at a piece of money and said, I cannot figure out how to make that fly. We can do it with home, with a lot of subsidies. We can do it with tax credits. We can do it with developer subsidies. We can layer those funds. But I cannot figure out how to make this go with affordable housing development.
Thank you, Brenda. Quick question for me, since we're on this topic, and then Councilmember Purington and Councilmember Boyette. Yes. So kind of jumping ahead to the next step of when there would be an application process for people to request these dollars, how do we make sure that we're not just supplanting what they're going to do anyway? and make sure that they're actually adding services, even if it might be for a relatively short period of time, because there is the sustainability issue that Councilmember Rupsis identified. But how do we make sure we're getting something new, a bigger bang for the buck?
We know how many people the organizations are serving in the qualifying populations because that was part of our survey. We know what they're saying. We know whether, one of our questions was, how are they funded? So you have this information today. And I don't know how many times did it say PJ must, the participating jurisdiction must? It's like 379 times in this document. This is the worst set of regulations I've ever read. Please, HUD, don't listen to this, but it's really tough. So
Okay, so we would
can
make that a
develop an application
criteria
process.
of actually getting the grant, some sort of demonstration of that.
Yes.
Okay. Councilmember Purington, Councilmember Boyette?
And I think what has been brought forward is the sustainability of this. Do we have to accept this money?
You do not.
So my question is that this money is federal dollars, and they've put a lot of different layers on it, as you described it, for making the city being held accountable and liable for it. And we have no say over the agencies, the services, the nonprofits that would be awarded this money.
You do. You know, we have to develop policies and procedures for whatever you decide to get allocated today for HUD. As soon as HUD gives us the go on the allocation plan, we have an extensive policy and procedure writing sessions that we have to do internally with staff. And we would also like to, put out some, we have to decide, for example, if you're doing rental assistance, if it's only 3 months of rental assistance or if it's 6 months of rental assistance. So there's all of those kinds of decisions that the city has to set. We can involve the city council any part or bring the services, here. We could do a public hearing to do, a review of the things we'd like to fund and the parameters around those, and to give you an idea of what that application's looking like too. So there's a lot of, and we will bring back any applications that have been submitted to the city. The Community Development Board will typically go visit those organizations in person to review the applications, and then they'll bring their recommendations here to you, just like we do with CDBG and Home. And then you get to decide what agencies are funded.
Councilor Boyette, Purington, you had a follow-up?
Yes, I did. So as far as I'm concerned, there still isn't, the oversight that needs to happen with these individual agencies. To come to council every time you want to spend or look at an application, to me, that doesn't seem reasonable. But in moving beyond that, I guess what we've been asking for these past few years with some of these agencies that have requested money from council that, do their own fundraising is, what is the outcome? We haven't seen what we would consider outcome, positive outcome from some of the services. Plus, with a lot of these agencies, they're having trouble hiring mental health counselors, addiction counselors, case management workers. And so do you give this money to the different agencies and then you wait for them to hire these people? Because they're having a hard time hiring. And as the mayor said, are we going to do something different? And it doesn't sound like, if we can't hire the people to do it, we're really not going to be doing anything differently. So if you want to comment on that, that would be fine. Thank you.
We would absolutely, we usually send out an application for a specific period of time, typically 6 weeks or so, and then we receive applications by a specific deadline. So we would bring a set of organizations for you to review and that have already been vetted through our Community Development Board for funding. For example, when we did the coronavirus funding, we made sure that those organizations were serving, they were already providing that service, they had some expertise, they had already been able to provide us their program parameters. We'd have to get much more involved in this program, but if you think also, we do have a coordinated entry system in Billings through the continuum of care, so they do have regular meetings where they're making referrals to service providers to bring people out of homelessness, and you've heard some of that before with Substance Abuse Connect. So that would also be one system that we could utilize to distribute the funding. HRDC only receives about, I hate to misspeak, but I think it's just over $100,000 a year for, to support emergency shelter grants for their population. So we could expand that significantly. But we could also do outcomes. We could absolutely build that in, absolutely, 100%.
Councilmember Boyette?
My last question, just there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Back to Councilmember Rowan.
I have so many questions, Brenda. So let me try to be succinct, Mayor, and not take up too much time. But if we do the supportive services, I am concerned, and you can tell me I'm wrong, which I'm sure you would enjoy doing. How are we not just making a certain set of renters more competitive in a terrible market? I mean, we're doing things to help some people try to get housing, but we're not doing anything to expand the housing available to people. So I'm not sure how we're making the kind of impact we would want to make.
One of the things that we can pay for are rental arrears. So let's say the prior housing authority Billings Homefront applies to the city for, past rent due.
Yeah.
They would not have to evict those folks for non-payment of rent, for example.
But that's what I'm saying, right? We're making a certain set of people more successful in the market, but we're not actually addressing the underlying housing issues. I mean, we can get someone a housing navigator, but they're navigating the same 3 apartments that everybody's trying to get into, right?
Yes, I'm hoping that we can keep some people that already have housing in housing, because you can fund that.
So we reduce the
population.
demand and there's a churn in the market. Okay.
The other piece is we need housing to be developed in the city. I'm not a housing developer. I recommend financing.
Yeah.
So you are the decision body behind that. So we need people to apply for that program. And I do think that if we have $1.7 million in home, again, we're coming back to you with the annual allocation process. So we're hoping that, we're actually following City Council's lead from last year, and then looking at putting more funding into affordable housing development. And so this is the number today. We also get repayments and, every day. So we're right at this $2 million. Maybe this is a better pot of money for people to apply for, a developer to apply for.
So you're queuing up exactly to my final question, Mayor. When you explained before the challenges with this particular pot of money, I'm not sure I was tracking. Are you suggesting that the sort of general partners in this space, your CHOTOs, your housing authorities, that they're not able to meet these administrative rules for 15 years? I mean, I get a private sector developer, sort of an arm's length transaction, that would be more complicated. But the people who do this all the time, it feels like they could comply.
Through CDBG and home.
But you think not these dollars?
Home ARP, 70% of the people that they're going to be putting into these units will not be able to pay rent. It's all through the home ARP regulation. And they want us to do subsidy layering to make sure that we have enough operating reserves and, replacement reserves in place to carry it for 15 years.
And vouchers don't meet that sufficiently.
I think it would be difficult to do that without supportive services in addition to housing, which is why we're recommending a different tiered strategy. Ms. HUD's big idea is to put all that together and have it go. And I'm saying you can't do the units. Can we do the services and the units?
Okay, Councilmember Bernice?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm having a difficult time with this too, but I think I understand these. These dollars here you're showing on screen now, these are the ones that would go to building housing and what the city is not on the hook for.
Correct.
Back to the ARPA dollars that we have this QP tied to it. If we were to say give all of that money to YWCA, they do a really good job for public safety. They do a good job for homeless and things like that. So in that case, we're kind of getting bang for our buck. We're doing some public safety things. We're also doing some home things. But to Mayor's point is maybe can they build a building with that, or is it I guess, is that the kind of services, is that going to be that they can build buildings with that and build more housing with that? They can't do that. So if that were to go to them, they could use it to offset their operating costs, things like that to provide, and that would free up money then to maybe, then they could use the money to build some more buildings. And so they can just shuffle the money from over to cover their operating expenses for whatever period of time to then shuffle that money to then build more units for them to operate. Does that make sense?
Yes.
They can do that. And then that wouldn't be tied to the money. So in some cases, the grant may be okay to cover what they're doing as long as they can show they're going to use their freed up funds to build more affordable housing. And it wouldn't be tied back, the only thing it would be tied back to the city is the operational, what they're doing to make sure they checked all the boxes and reported back to us so that we wouldn't be on the hook for that, to repay that money. Okay.
They also have to agree to serve all of the qualifying populations, not just people fleeing from domestic or dating violence or
Oh, I see.
human trafficking. So they have to provide services for people experiencing homelessness the same. It has to be equity in those.
So any of the grant recipients have to be able to do it for all of the populations.
Or we can do 17 organizations that all do some pieces of the qualifying populations. The city staff is responsible for making sure that our entire spectrum of the qualifying populations is getting benefit from some of this money. So let's say the first application process that we get nobody to do domestic violence or dating violence services. Then we need to do a structured RFP that says, we're missing this piece. We cannot fund this other stuff until we can assuredly do this piece as well. So we're on the hook for making sure it's spread to everyone, which is also one of the biggest issues we have with affordable housing development. How are you going to do 3 or 10 or 20 units and have one organization doing all the qualifying populations with housing and then having them have to figure out how to pay for the services piece because we don't have that piece covered?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Tricky.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. Let me see if I have this correctly. So essentially, this program has created, so the guidelines for this program have made it really difficult for a small grant to be financially sustainable over the 15 years. Basically because 2 out of the 3 people of the 3 houses that we can rent to have to be 2 people who cannot afford to be in those houses, right?
All 3 would have to be because it's over 2. 2.1 equals 3 according to
Okay.
HUD.
Okay.
All
So
3.
essentially, if we tried to build housing with this, the city is going to have to bail the program out at some point in the future.
Yes.
Okay.
Because
thank
you see the overall intent of HUD is to provide you the whole package, but they forgot to fund the little jurisdictions.
So let me shift over to a couple questions about services, about the services that are in there. The one statement that it was in the presentation that really stood out to me was the phrase, at least 17 organizations. That means to me that you guys went out, tried to find out who was doing this. You found 17, but you're not sure that there aren't more than 17 out there.
She contacted 80 agencies with hard copy and email surveys and chased everybody around for survey responses. So she got 26.
Yeah, so the point that I'm getting at here is that our coordination of all of these services is so poor that the people who are in the city government who are the closest to this are not sure how many people are actually out there working on this program, on this problem, which to me absolutely screams that we need capacity building or, capacity building types of grants being given to these organizations so that they can be better coordinated, so that there's reporting going up and down, and all of that. I guess in my mind, and let me just say, see if you think this would be a viable kind of grant. Let's say a bunch of family violence organizations got together and they decided to coordinate their services, make sure that it's better, so that people can find the pathway to the different services a lot better, and that they build in some capacity to make sure that these additional services would be available over time once this money was used up. So build a coordinating strategy, but also build a fundraising strategy along with it.
Wouldn't that be amazing? We do have a coordinated entry program, and they do have resources, just not enough. But it would be neat. It would be really neat if we could, our qualifying populations groups would be able to create that referral strategy as well, which is actually a requirement of the funding anyway. They have to tell us how they're going to coordinate referrals, and we do have some preferences based on the data that we've received. So individuals experiencing homelessness, families experiencing homelessness would be at the top of that list.
Great, thank you.
Okay, council, this is a public hearing. I'm inclined to open up for public hearing unless there's somebody who hasn't put a question, and Councilmember Gulick, you have not, so.
Yes, one more question for Ms. Beckett. So if we have the home ARP funds go to supportive services, does that free up CDBG or home funds that would otherwise have gone for supportive housing or supportive services, either in the past or?
Yeah, the city council by policy has not funded grants to nonprofit organizations outside of pandemic response since 2012. So that was a directive that the Community Development Board received from City Council, and they didn't like it very well. I know we have some board members still here because they were very, they were in a huge advocacy role for those social service organizations. So they had us call everyone at that time to make sure that they would still be okay as organizations without CDBG. The problem with CDBG back then and today is that we have to prove it's a new or expanded service every time something is funded. And after you've funded an organization with tiny bits of money, say $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 for 20 years, it is very difficult for me to stand in front of HUD to say this is a new or expanded service. Funding new people is not an expansion. It's not a service expansion according to HUD. So that became our problem with serving those grants. Yeah, it will not take the place of this at all. It'd be a new thing.
Councilmember Gulick?
Thank you. Yeah, a follow-up question. Thank you. So, some of us are wondering whether or not we should accept this money at all in terms of sustainability, the question of sustainability, and do you have thoughts as to why or why not we should accept home ARP money?
I think the concept behind home ARP from HUD's perspective is good. I think they wanted to give money, enough money to organizations to provide non-congregate shelter, expanding shelter to include non-congregate shelter, so individual rooms with their own bathrooms, or to provide rental housing with some kind of signed lease agreement for people like in Housing First. This council has funded 4 units of Housing First in the past. Those units are still operating today. So when they said, we want to give you this money to do this, we're going to give you enough to provide social services, we're going to give you enough to subsidize the rent and the replacement reserves, and here you go. Here's tons of money. There's plenty of money for you now. I just think they missed it when it came to minimum. They should have given every city it should have been all qualifying at least 5 million, or don't fund the little guys for under 5 million. That's the huge mistake that they've made. And they acknowledged, both in webinars and in person, that they have made many mistakes with this process, including shooting out money and then not having any regulations for us to look at for 9 or 10 months. And then making the regulations so difficult and so cumbersome. It's 97 pages of city responsibility, plus 77 pages of waivers regarding other regulations. So they did a pretty terrible job here, I think. But the initial thing is good. I would fund it because we have money available for affordable housing development. If we didn't, I might say something different, but we do have families in need here. We have households in need here. We have thousands of people on waiting lists for housing.
Okay, thank you very much, Council. Brenda, let's open it for public hearing on this item. Item number 2, everybody with us has heard this discussion, and if somebody is online, I'm counting on staff to let me know. But if you'd like to comment, please come to the podium. We ask that you can make a line behind the speaker so we know if anybody else is going to be coming forward. Just tell us your name and address. Come on forward. Go ahead. Tell us your name and address, and watch the little timer over here, and it'll count down from 3 minutes.
Council and Mayor, I'm Kathy Smith. I reside at 2440 River Oaks Drive. And I thoroughly read and analyzed the numbers in this plan. And I was going to point out some errors and blah, blah. And my conclusion was I was disturbed that there was not money available for hard structures, that all the money was going to go towards services. And now that I listened to the discussion why, I understand that. But so the plan is written, I would say, is what the plan should be approved as. Outside of that, though, I represent, or I work on a board of an organization trying to put together a low-barrier homeless shelter in this town. And the words we get from donors are, well, have you gotten HUD grants yet? And as you listen to Brenda and Carly talk about the difficulty of complying with the HUD regulations, you'll understand our problem. So I would go with the services. I would approve the plan as it is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Mayor and Cole, council members. My name is Teddy Shorten. I work for Homefront and I have for 22 years. During that time, we've seen the affordable rental community dwindle down to just about nothing. So although this plan would provide services like support services for rental assistance, if you don't have a place to go, it's all for naught, because the minute that support service runs out, they're out. So you can pay rent for 3 months and then the landlord's gonna say, you can't pay for 4th month, you need to go. Homefront has already worked with Home in 4 different developments, and we are doing the 15 years that we have to do. We do it well, we make good structures. It's part of our layering to get as much funding as we can from as many different sources as possible. And we have worked with HUD for years and years and years. So we understand the complex requirements that they give us at all times. In the last 3 years, I can give you an example. We've had about 450 people 3 years ago on our 2-bedroom wait list. Right now it's double, it's almost 900 just for 2-bedroom wait list. We have over 7,000 people, 7,000 families waiting for affordable housing through Homefront. One of the reasons that we think this has happened is because of the price of housing has gone up, so people have sold their rentals. And as a result, there is no other places for people to go. So you can give them application fees, security deposit, help. But if there's no place to go, then what good is the support service? It doesn't do any good. Billings is the biggest city in Montana, and even the state of Montana is trying to get affordable housing for workforces through House Bill 574 right now. And that is going to be hopefully a creation of a fund that affordable housing providers and other developers can use to create more housing that's affordable to anybody. We are the biggest city, and I think we should show the way to try everything we can to get affordable housing. I'm counting down here. Let me pivot. I do have an adult daughter who works full-time. She's in her 40s, just got a divorce. She works full-time and a part-time job both. She can't afford a house in Billings, so she has to live out at Acton. And so she has to drive in every day, work all those hours, and for anybody in that situation, and there's a lot of people that have that kind of trauma, their family split up, an income provider dies, they're the ones that are looking for affordable housing, and I think we owe it to them to be able to provide the affordable housing structures that we need. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Pamela Aning, and I work for Homefront, and I've been there for going on 9 years. I am the tenancy support specialist at Homefront, and I deal with a lot of the population that has been mentioned here tonight, those who are homeless and those who are going to be homeless and those who are struggling in their current living situation. So it's not just a matter of the people who are homeless, but also folks who are living in their homes, who are working and can no longer afford to live where they're living, being priced out of their homes. I dealt with a veteran couple who had lived in their apartment for over 8 years and had to leave their apartment complex because their rent tripled in the amount that they needed to pay. And so for these people, I think it is vital that we have affordable housing for people to live. I've worked with the MERA program. I'm on the COC council, and I help people with the supportive services, but it's not enough. They get the supportive services. MERA is ending. I have 311 families and individuals right now who are looking for places to live, who have the means to pay for it, but can't afford anything. So I would really hope that you guys will consider building more affordable housing so it wouldn't be just a Band-Aid that we were putting on this problem, but actually giving real solutions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Trina Swafford, and I am the HCV, or the Housing Choice Voucher Section 8 Director at Homefront. And I just wanted to point out a few things to maybe help explain or give you some comfort in the idea of using that money for affordable housing rather than all supportive services. Homefront already serves the populations that are mentioned, not exclusively, but largely, those exact populations. We are already required by HUD to report the income targeting and the services that we provide for those specific populations. In a nutshell, that it's what we do is take on the reporting burden, and we do it very well. We have an impeccable track record with HUD. We report high reporting every year, even years that we weren't required to basically take a grade on how we did. We still did that, and I think when you get down to the bottom of, really to the root of what's needed, we all agree that we need more affordable housing. We all agree that those supportive services and the wraparounds are important. I think what I would want you to know is that you have sitting next to you, we're your guy. If you need to know a guy that can help you make sure that the reporting is done correctly, and if you need to know a guy that can already give you all of the statistics and many, many more than the survey that I felt was fairly incomplete, we're your guy. And we're sitting right there, always waiting for an opportunity to do that. Over 7,000 people on a waiting list for housing is an astronomical number. And since our CEO began reporting that, to a certain set of entities 4 months ago, that number has increased by 300 every month. And that's before Mira put the kibosh on. So yeah, we're your guy. Thanks.
Thank you. Next.
Hello, my name is Bailey Desper. I live at 540 Sudan up in the Heights. I'm here tonight to oppose Section 2 regarding the approval of the ARPA funding. Reason for that is the amount that has been allotted from the government of the $1.7 million. I personally do not feel like that is enough funding that would be better used for like social services and, you know, kind of help people get ahead, like regarding back rent or even, you know, just supportive services for the utility bills would be more better use of these funding versus trying to build something going forward. There are plenty of people out there that are using the merit funding in hotels that is ending soon, that this funding could be used towards extending their stay a little bit longer while they try to figure out a game plan B to establish sustainable housing going forward. And that's basically all I have to say going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, good evening, Mayor, Council. My name is Ronald Skees, that's spelled Skees, and I live at 4431 Toyon Drive. I first want to really appreciate Ms. Collins' hard work at herding the cats of service providers, as well as Ms. Beckett's great follow-up to the presentation. She did provide an additional information that helps us understand what decision you guys have to make. I work at HRDC 7, the Home Center. I'm the Director of Asset Development there. I just started in that role in December, and I just moved to your community in December to do this role. I will say that you do have a very strong community of service providers, and you guys are very involved in making sure that you're helping to address the housing stability need, and I appreciate that. I also welcome you to come and meet with me over at the Home Center to hear some of the new and exciting programs that we are doing to provide some stability counseling. So as you're making decisions, I understand this limited amount of dollars, and I also understand those federal ties and how hard it is to be able to match need with what federal requirements are. And you have a huge task ahead of you. I just ask that as you're making these decisions, just remind yourself of those who you serve in your community. They are so many different faces. There are so many different needs. And I'll wrap it up with letting you know that I graduated high school sleeping in a car. I was a homeless person. I was a homeless kid. And it was not through programs as much as it was through people. You guys each have so much opportunity to help people change lives through programs, but also through your decisions. So as you are facing this big decision of what to do, I also ask that as you're making the decision, look at all of the public comment. The public comment period has been extended. So if that means maybe looking at extending how long you have to make a decision or vote on this allocation plan. Again, I thank you. You guys have a huge task ahead of you. And again, if you want to come and see some of the outcome measures that we have at HRDC 7, the Home Center, please give me a call. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Council. My name is David Harris. I reside at 4113 Jansma Avenue on the south side of Billings. I work at the Mental Health Center on the Projects for Assistance and Transition from Homelessness. On my drive to work every single day, I turn up North 29th Street. More and more, we are seeing how that is closed because someone is accidentally hit by a moving train. I think our issue is housing, absolutely, but we need those supportive services. We need mental health. We need more people like me that are out on the ground and talking to these individuals. We need people that can give them rides to the mental health center, give them a ride to Rimrock, get them a chemical dependency evaluation. 3 houses won't fix the 7,000 people on that wait list, but maybe through our services, through getting people treatment, through getting people to see a counselor, we can see that. Me personally, I've struggled with suicide. I've struggled with that. I don't feel that we need to build more houses. We need to build around these people. We need to bring them in for services. We need to reopen places that were once established for that. We need to have a place that they can come and see a case manager. They can see a housing navigator. They can see someone immediately for their need to talk about it. Even if the resolution isn't done, even if we are just putting them on our partner agency's wait list, we're able to connect with them and get them into treatment that might save their lives, that might save their family lives. I don't think we should be spending this money on housing. I think we should be spending it on supportive services. And I'm glad to see that that's the route that we're hopefully going. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is DeAnthony Willis. I reside at 1004 24th Street West. I am the coordinator for the PATH program that David speaks about. Just a real quick run-up of what the PATH program actually is, if you guys aren't too familiar with it, is if you take Billings in a glass jar and you put in the services that they have, like HRDC, Homefront, you know, all the other, St. Vincent de Paul, all the other services, if you pour a bag of sand in there, that sand is PATH. So we fill in the parts where most people slip between the cracks. We're on the ground with them. When it's cold in the mornings, we're out there passing out blankets. We're out there giving out gloves. We're out there with the people on the ground. Housing, I got a housing navigator, and housing's a big issue, but if you give an addict a house, they're gonna turn that house into a trap house. I'm a recovering addict. And so there has to be a two-part thing to this. And so when I first stepped into this program and took this over, the biggest thing I noticed in our community is need shopping. And so clients go from place to place looking for needs and getting needs met. And we're not addressing the real root issue of why they're in the office in the first place. And so with PATH, we like to look at why you're in my office in the first place. Why are you needing a check? Why are you looking for this in the first place? Let's get down to the root and let's address that root. Housing isn't the only part of that. It's the substance abuse, it's the mental illness. We're literally sitting in a society right now with so much generational use, and the only thing we're offering them right now is a 30-day treatment and then back onto the same streets. And so there's so much more than just housing that I think we need, and I think this needs to go to supportive services also. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else on item number 2? We do have someone online. We've got a couple people. We'll start with Rebecca Noel. Rebecca, go ahead.
Still muted, Rebecca.
Yep, still on. There you go.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, guys. Thank you, council. Thank you, mayor. Thank you, Carly and Brenda, for the presentation and additional information. The best way to support the qualifying populations in our city with home ARP dollars is to fund supportive services. And I urge council to vote to approve the allocation plan as written. And I am chair of the Community Development Board, and I know that we look forward to working with our community partners to meet all of the community goals, supportive services, and affordable housing. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Jenna Martin, if you can take yourself off mute, you can go ahead anytime.
Hi, guys. I'm glad to see folks come back and testify more for housing. I was just there talking about that, as you all know. But I would like to urge the vote to approve the allocation plan as written too. I'm also a member of the Community Development Board, and we heard this presentation before, and Brenda and Carly have really gone through every possible which way to use this funding and how it would be most beneficial. And as others have mentioned tonight, there are more to just housing. Like, these social services really are important. And seeing how these funds, how much money this is, and all the different guidelines for how it was used, I really do hope that there is an approval of the allocation plan as written. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anybody else before we close the public hearing?
Mayor Cole, I do have Mary Gillooly.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, this is Mary Gillooly. I live at 1121 North 24th, and I work at St. Vincent de Paul. I agree that a lot of this money should be spent on supportive services. I know we do provide rental and utility assistance, and the need is growing. We out of our budget, we were out of money by the 4th of February for the whole month of February because the need is so great. Some of that is related to people coming off of MIRA, but a lot of it is related to that some of these are people that have never asked for assistance previously because their rent has become unaffordable. Today I did a utility assistance for somebody, again, who's never asked any organization in Billings that uses Service Point for assistance previously. These supportive services are necessary to keep people housed. I'm worried about what's going to happen with MIRA ending, certainly a possibility of increasing the number of homeless people and families on the street. But if we can't keep people in their homes because of lease violations like non-payment of utilities or being unable to pay their rising rent costs, then certainly we're going to see more individuals and families having no choice but to live on the streets in Billings, whereas those supportive services might have been able to keep them in their homes. So I am in favor of the document as written. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, do not see anybody else online. No one else is coming
Mayor
forward.
Cole,
Oh, go ahead, Tony.
we have one more. It looks like Patty Webster.
Patty, go ahead.
Hi, Mayor Cole, Council. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I want to give a huge shout out to Brenda Wyeth and the whole team over there. We too were one of the CAPs that were hard to herd in getting the survey filled out. I completely appreciate the complexity of this funding. I'm sure Brenda's been pulling her hair out, trying to figure out ways to make this work for the best of the community. And I appreciate the CD board's time too, having served on the CD board for 8 years before I understand all the hard work they do. Having said that, as the CEO of Homefront, I would be remiss if I did not speak to the need that we are seeing every single day and to bring that to the attention of council and the community. As of today, we have 7,194 families on our waiting list for assistance in Billings. It is growing over 300 every single month. We have several vouchers in our community that we receive for the Housing Choice Voucher Program. We administer about 1,200 of those vouchers. Right now, we're only able to utilize about 86% of those vouchers because there are no places for families to move into. Of the families who spend that time and wait on the waiting list, at a time, it's usually around 2 years, by the time they actually get a voucher right now, there's only a 24% success rate because there are no places to live. So I'm not saying this should be an either or, I'm saying this should be a yes and. How can we find a way? And I know Brenda is extremely innovative. Her and I have had a bazillion, mind togetherness, if you will, and I completely respect all the work that the CD board is doing. Also, when Carly said, and great job Carly, by the way, when Carly said that there had been no affordable housing applications since 2019, one of those reasons is that there's not enough money in any one pot to make this all work. And so as Brenda said before, with the subsidy layering and trying to figure all of that out, it's a huge job. I do have to say, I'm going to push back a little bit on the 3 units because this innovative project we're doing up in the Heights right now, and we've not asked the city for funding yet, but we will. I could actually do 60 units with that $1.2 million. So, and that's just, we have to think out of the box. We can't only think about stick-built units anymore. We have to find a new way. And, just working together, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to ask for an extension. And thank you so much, Carly and team, for granting that extension. This is such a complex issue. This is such a different way of funding that HUD has ever done before. And they put all these caveats of reporting and requirements on there. It truly does need more time to take a closer look, to see what we could come up with. That does not mean that Brenda and team haven't done that. I have full faith that they have. Trust me, I do. There just has to be another way. And I want us to approach this as yes and. We need all of it, not just part of it. That's all I have.
Thank you very much, Patty. Okay, anybody else online? I don't think so, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so, and no one is coming forward, so we'll close our public hearing. Council, we've got about 12 minutes before we would normally take a break, so we'll see if we can get this one wrapped up, if possible. Councilmember Owen?
I have a procedural question.
Sure.
So it's my understanding that the Community Development Department has extended the comment period. And I think, although I may be wrong, that there have been some public comments that have come in by email that would normally be in this report that council hasn't seen. So I'm wondering if there's still a public comment period and there's comments that we haven't reviewed, if approval tonight is appropriate.
We've sort of addressed that, or I have a phone call with our city attorney, Gina Dahl. So I'm going to ask her to address that. I don't know, and maybe staff can address whether there are other written or email comments that we have not seen. I was not aware of that, but staff has told at least Homefront that the comment period would continue through the 20th, which raises the same question that other things might come in the meantime.
And it may be legally permissible, but I think there's a question of whether or not it's respectful of the public comment.
And I'll just kind of jump to, in an email that staff, Wyeth, sent out, I don't know that whole council was copied on this, just a few minutes before our meeting actually started. He proposed the following motion, which was, and again, so this is for approval, which the staff may, or council may or may not want to do. But anyway, it says the proposed motion would say, having conducted a public hearing, consider written and spoken testimony and directing staff to include additional public comment through March 20. I move to approve the amendment of the fiscal year 21-22 annual action plan and home ARP allocation plan as recommended by staff and community development board. So that proposed motion would contemplate the addition of public comment at the end of the plan in the appendices. Personally, the concern I have with that is imagine some epiphany where some ultimately wise public comment would cause us to change the conclusion, right? So what I was going to propose tonight was the addition of the following after that proposed motion. So, and I can come back with more detail later, but you'll get the gist of this. So anyway, I would say that earlier motion, but then comma, subject to the condition that if public comment received hereafter would or might justify amendment of this plan as determined in the discretion of the city administrator, the city administrator is directed to place this item on the council's March 27, 2023 agenda for the purpose of further consideration of such possible amendment or amendments. So that would put it on the city administrator to refer it back to him or back to us if in his discretion that was his conclusion. I would also say, I'll remind council, any council member would have the power at our next public business meeting to bring a motion for reconsideration if they voted in the, on the prevailing side. So individual council members would also have a element of discretion. But I recognize your issue with, and so that's was some of the thinking on that subject. But with your okay, I'll ask Gina for her thoughts. And then Councilmember Gulick wanted to comment as well. So Gina, did you want to comment further?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor and Councilmember Owen. I understand the issue, and I share the concern. I think that Wyeth can explain why he doesn't believe any additional public comment would change council action, but I guess all I can really say is that the HUD, generally we do a 30-day public comment period unless otherwise allowed by HUD. And in this particular situation, a 15-day public comment period is acceptable. And so that is, given the short deadline, that is what staff proceeded with in order to get this submitted. I think that Mayor Cole's suggestion would provide a solution to any additional concerns that council may have. If there was some public comment that came in that would cause council to want to reconsider. But I think based on what Wyeth can probably explain better than me, that all the service providers did respond to the survey and provide information to which staff used to put this plan together. So I don't think that they're anticipating any public comment that would really change any action that council would take, but that's really all I can say at this point. And I'll let Wyeth elaborate on that.
It would be unusual for us to act in the middle of an open comment period.
It would be, and frankly, personally, I wish that public comment period would not have been extended because it is just adding a further complication to this. Although, again, just want to say that the 15-day public comment period is satisfactory to HUD, and we have observed a 15-day public comment period, and public comment was accepted tonight, and you did hear from some of the people who had a concern about the extension of the public comment period, at least one person you heard from.
May we ask Wyeth, since Gina want to ask Wyeth?
If he would specifically indicate if they have received written comments that council hasn't seen, that would be helpful to understand.
Mayor and council, and Councilmember Owen, yeah, we've received, I was just asking Brenda, I think one or two comments that weren't in the plan because they came after you got the memo, and we didn't have them, in fact, one came today, so not in time for us to prepare for those. There are similar, one of them is one of the people who spoke tonight at the public hearing, so some similar comments, but there was an email with that as well. So anyway, so I think we have one or two, I believe, comments that are not incorporated yet into the document, because what we do is we provide all that to HUD as part of the package. In fact, the email comments from Patty Webster from last week about the comment period are included, or will be included for HUD as well. So I guess just to explain how that's all getting collected as part of the process.
Okay. Wyeth, do you want to comment further on the sort of the procedural setting that we find ourselves in?
Sure, yeah, Council, Mayor, and Council, and yeah, in talking with Gina, clearly the idea of trying to accommodate further comment made this even harder for us. Instead of saying, no, we're not going to extend it, that's it, the 13th is the end of the line. So maybe, on our part, we were trying to provide a little bit extra time given the fact that we don't have much time left. We have to turn this in by the end of the month, and we're trying to make sure that things are prepared and can be turned in, which is why we recommended that this come to you tonight to make sure that it got in front of you and everybody understood what was going on. I guess the issue, as Gina said, City Attorney said, the comment, we're following what HUD requires. Whether the period ends now or ends on the 20th, we've had the hearing, we're doing all what's required. The thing that's unusual about this process and this plan is that because we did a community survey to the service providers, who are the ones that ultimately potentially would be the ones asking for for these funds in the future and going through that process, they actually informed the content of the document that you see before you and informed the recommendation of doing the service provision and then using our other funding sources to do housing. And so the part that's a little, I guess, unusual is that, yeah, the comments that we're getting right now are from the same service providers that informed the plan through the survey. And so we're in this kind of situation where we already, that's how we came up to the recommendations we came to. So I guess my thought process has been that even if we have some more comment and we consider that up until the 20th, we're still in the situation where it's not going to be changing the recommendation based on the services and information we received. So that's where we find ourselves in this situation.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Gillick, Nice?
Director Friday, if you maybe stay up there, maybe this is just asking for more detail, but I presume that there's a reason that this is before us today and not the 27th, because I know you have a 31st deadline. Being realistic, what kind of challenges would that impose on staff if we were to wait until the 27th to make the decision?
Councilmember Gulick, Mayor and Council, yeah, I mean, the concern is we have just a couple of days then to get everything into HUD through their system and trying to make sure everything is packaged up. And so not that, not going to say it's impossible, but it puts us in a very difficult position to try to make sure that everything's correct, it's in, we get verification that HUD has received it and we're in. Because literally if we miss that or something goes wrong, then we're not, potentially don't have a chance to even decide about the funding later. We've missed it. So that's what we're just concerned about, is just that really narrow window after the 27th.
Okay, Councilmember Nice?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I'm concerned about us deciding on something that's actually, we still are open public comment. I think that just shows the public that we're not listening to what they're saying. And so I would prefer to see us hold off on the decision. In fact, I would recommend maybe we even just put it on the consent agenda. We've held the public hearing. I think that's all that's required. This could go on the consent agenda. And if it needed to be pulled off, it could be. Otherwise, it would just be approved on the consent agenda. But on my bigger concern was with the whole plan is just with the dollars that it's going to it's going to make the city liable for, up to that 1.2 million that has to be paid back. If any one of those organizations don't follow these very strict, as Brenda indicated, onerous type guidelines. And so my real concern is that we even approve any of this. Now, one of the things that I heard is, yes, you could use it to build 3 homes, you'd be on the hook for 15 years. But then I just heard Homefront say they could use this money to build 60 homes. Now, that's a lot of homes. And that's a lot of families that it could help. The question is, does that mean the city is on the hook for 15 years for 60 homes and 60 families? I would hope that the Homefront could answer that question, whether or not they have the reserves capable to allow 60 homes. If I understand correctly what Brenda said, they have to live up to 15 years rent-free, if I understand that correctly. And so they would have to have their reserves. Otherwise, I wouldn't want to even do that with Homefront. And so there are some questions, I think, that I would love to hear back from Homefront on whether or not we would like to move this into a housing. They seem to be the most capable and most kind of one in that arena that serves all of those populations. And that's something I would like to see us bring back and between now and when this actually gets approved. But again, my initial comment is if we're going to vote to approve it now, my recommendation is not to approve it at all, because I don't think there's any type of protection against the city for all these organizations, these 17 or more, that they're going to have to actually build a coalition together. We can't even get our continuum of care to agree. And now we're going to get all of these organizations to have to agree and follow all the standards. And then if they don't follow, we're on the hook. So I would recommend we pass on the money.
Okay, we'll want staff to comment, Brenda, at some point. Well, yeah, why don't you? And let me just ask a question. Is it true that just because there was one failure, one organization got 10% of the money, and they didn't follow the rules, that we are suddenly at jeopardy for 100%, not just the 10% that the rules were not followed for. I didn't understand that we would be at risk for everything, but I don't know.
I believe that, I can just tell you what my past experience with HUD would be for that specific activity. If you recall, we had similar kinds of,
I'm sorry, let me clarify. But when you say for that specific
So let's say you-
activity, do you mean the 10% problem or the 100%?
okay, so you give an organization $50,000 and they house people that are not qualified population. We can ask them to repay us this $50,000, which, would rarely happen, I think, with most of our social service organizations. But I believe that we would have to pay HUD just that $50,000, although it would bring down upon us an audit, which is super comfortable and with us dealing with HUD and the hundreds and hundreds of documents we have to provide them to make sure that we're following the regulation. What I will say is I do have an excellent staff, and we do have time to put together policies and procedures, and we can even bring those back here, program design kinds of things you can look at and the public can look at. But we already implemented the coronavirus funding, and that also had qualifying population questions, and my staff built forms that would make it very easy for those folks
Okay, I'm
to
going to cut you off because I think you've answered your question, which was just the portion where there was a problem, but it would still be a mess. Okay. Okay, Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I would like to make the motion that the mayor read earlier and allow council to decide whether or not they wanted to allow the city administrator that latitude to bring it back if that was necessary. So if you don't mind, I will take your piece of paper. All right, thank you. Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken testimony, and directing staff to include additional public comment through March 20th, I move to approve the amendment to the FY 21-22 Annual Action Plan and Home ARP Allocation Plan as recommended by staff and Community Development Board, subject to the condition that if public comment received hereafter would or might justify amendment of this plan as determined in the direction of the city administrator is directed to place this item on the consent, on the
This item on the council's.
council's March 27, 2023 agenda for the purpose of further consideration of such possible amendment or amendments.
Thank you very much. And the only thing I would clarify is I think you referenced the direction of the city administrator, but that should have been the discretion, in the discretion of the city administrator.
In the discretion of the city administrator.
All right, thank you very much for the motion. Was there a second, Councilmember Ripsis? Okay, so you do have a motion in front of you. It is for approval of the plan with that condition. Councilmember Boya, Joy, Owen?
Carly, can you come back? I'm just, one of in our reading, it says the Community Development Board will review applications for funding and provide recommendations prior to submission to the City Council for final decision. So you send out, you get two people that'll come back, two organizations. Are you going to come to us and say, I don't like either one of these, or they don't fit? What happens if we don't get any qualified applicants?
We would only bring to you what the CD board recommended for funding. I am confident that we would get applications that are eligible just based on survey information. But I don't really know what would happen if we didn't. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
So the CB board does take their jobs very seriously, and they do site visits for the organizations, and nothing much gets past them. So I believe that they would make good recommendations for the council.
Okay. Good, Mr. Councilmember Boyette? before I go to Councilmember Joy, Owen, and Purington? Okay, Councilmember Joy?
Oh, thank you, Mayor and Council. I just wanted to speak in support of the motion. You know, this is awesome responsibility when you hear people come forward and say someone is going to lose their housing. It's awesome responsibility that we have. And to hear so many people in need, in not just in terms of housing, but just rental assistance and utility assistance. This is an awesome responsibility. And what I wish is that the city staff were correct and HUD had offered us $5 million and not this small amount. Because it's like trying to decide something very important with a toothpick and you're going to fix it, you know, and it's like, no, if you were going to fix it, you would have tools that actually matched the problem. And we've got a little tiny toothpick and we're trying to figure out how to stretch our toothpick to really, it's a really awesome responsibility and it's very difficult. And, you know, I really would like to speak to some of the constraints as a council member. You know, in Ward 3, there was a developer who wanted to, and this was years before the pandemic, who wanted to help out with affordability. So they built a couple of units and kept the price so they were affordable. They were bought by people who could afford more, kept for a couple of years, and flipped. So here we have the person trying to do the right thing. They do the right thing, and it still ends up not having the impact of affordability. Our constraints on the supply side is that our state law says we can't require affordability in our subdivision process. If you look around the country, a lot of states address this through state law by saying you must incorporate affordability as part of your subdivision. That's a constraint. On the demand side, what do? Not have more people come to our community? What do we do on the demand side? We haven't got much on the supply side. So I just really do appreciate everyone coming forward, and I appreciate the young men coming forward, speaking about their part in helping our community. And I want to thank you for doing that. I want to thank you. I know you probably don't make that much money, and it's a mission of service for you, but I really do appreciate all of the members of our community who go out and do that hard work to try to make our community livable and healthy. So I really do appreciate that, and thank you for stepping forward and saying that. I just would really ask all those service providers out there, if this motion passes and doesn't get reconsidered, please make applications. I mean, let's do the best we can with what we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Owen?
If Councilmember Rupes wants to speak to his second, I'm happy to defer.
Go ahead,
I am going to vote against this for two reasons, one procedural and one substantive. It really bothers me that we're going to act in the middle of an open public comment period, and I'm concerned that there's public comment that we haven't seen. I think it is disrespectful to members of the public, and I think it's particularly relevant here because in the home ARP plan as written, it really identifies correctly that there is a need for both of these things. The comment tonight indicated a need for both of these things. So any comment that comes in between now and the 20th is necessarily going to raise the possibility of changing council's mind because the balance is so close. This is such a jump ball because both are needed. And so the idea that a public comment that showed a path towards using these dollars to leverage more affordable housing units would inherently have to change our consideration of this proposal. And so I don't see how we don't end up with this back here if we're actually going to respect public comment and actually going to listen to the stakeholders who are involved here. I think it has to end up coming back to us if anything is received between now and the 20th. So that concerns me. But substantively, I am concerned that as someone who sort of is ancillary to all of these issues day to day, we definitely need supportive services for people who are at risk. But we need more housing. And the dollars, as everyone has said, are wildly insufficient. The proposal in front of us, to me, doesn't appear to leverage any additional contributions. It doesn't find a way to make the pot bigger. It doesn't find a way to attract additional resources to solve the problem that concerns me. If we only have an insufficient amount, we have to try to use it in a way that catalyzes other community action. And I'm concerned that this proposal in front of us is additive. It does important things for a small set of people because it's a small amount of money. I'm not convinced that we have explored all of the ways to make this exponential, multiplicative, so that we leverage dollars in investment, whether it's into supportive services or affordable housing construction. I just think we have to try to make this money drive other investment, not try to stretch it further. So for those reasons, I'm just concerned about where we're at, and I will be voting against it for those reasons.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Rupsis?
Thank you, Mayor. Chris, I just wanted to make sure, if we're having comment period open through next Monday, does that give us enough time to get it back on the agenda if you should so choose the following Monday? That should be enough time to amend the agenda, right?
Yeah, in order to meet the statute, yes, we can meet the statute amending the agenda.
And then if some unforeseen incredible opportunity comes up in that public comment that makes us want to reconsider approving this, we could open reconsideration and vote to not accept this proposal next Monday night, in which case Brenda would have 4 days to put together an entirely new proposal.
I'm going to need Wyatt's help on that or Brenda's help on that piece.
So if something comes up that makes us think that there might be another option, our only option next Monday or on the 27th would be to just not take the money.
Our recommendations have to follow the findings that were evident in the plan. And that would be very difficult, if not impossible to do. The reason why we have a very short public comment period is because we had major organizations that have spoken here did not submit information in their survey, and we extended through December 30th begging them to, and they still did not. So that squished it from this side, and then HUD squished it from the due date side, and we literally had 5 weeks to pull this all together. There's no other recommendation that we would make as a staff person. And I do not think we can rewrite the plan differently.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Purington, and then I'm going to make some comments. Councilmember Boyette had his hand up.
Thank you. I'm not inclined to vote for this for the pure and simple fact that these are very restricted federal dollars. Some of the things that, the Brenda said, we'll come up with policies, we'll come up with this, we'll come up with that. And I think there's so much uncertainty. You've got 17 organizations that did respond that are qualified out of the 26 that responded. Some of those have duplicate services. And so I don't know how many, if you would set a limit to how many people you're actually going to divvy this money up, because there's really not that much. I agree, it's not that much. But it has such an impact, I think, on the community as a whole. We're always complaining about we need to get our social partners partnering, thank you, that here they're vying against each other. They're competing for the same dollars. So there isn't anything, I think, that I've heard you say that would make me think this is going to help our housing situation. That's what it was for initially, but I don't see that, yes, we need social services, absolutely, but also I think we need to have some, a little bit more target set on what we want to accomplish with outcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Purington. I'll comment. This has been a great conversation, interesting. I too wish we had millions of dollars at stake. The reality is when you start with $1.2 million, and then the city would be entitled to take its administrative share, and then the organizations that get their respective allocation would take their administrative share. It gets whittled down about 30%, down to about $900,000. So just trying to keep that in perspective as one-time money. I was very forced to think hard about Councilmember Owen's earlier point, which I think was a very important one, which is, are we essentially just rearranging the chairs on the deck of the Titanic? If you're not plugging the leak in the Titanic, getting a better lifeboat or something, you're just choosing between who lives, who doesn't. But at the end of the day, we're not increasing the number of actual renters. It's just we're changing the mix and maybe improving the quality of renters, shall we call it, to better renters from bad renters. And I thought that was a really important question and point. And I think still fundamentally a lot of truth to that. But I think the reality is that the government is never going to solve this problem, especially with 3 more units. And the question is, how do you help the private sector do that? And I think if we can, through mental health counseling, rental counseling, substance abuse counseling, helping individuals, many more than 3 families, become better renters, we improve the ability of the market to build more, because people don't want to build to rent to bad renters. And so by improving that, we can stimulate the market, hopefully. I don't know how you prove that, but I do see some improvement there. Also, we're able to help people who now maybe can't make their own housing. Because of mental health, substance abuse problems. They can't maintain it. They can't improve their own home situation. And so they themselves, by their own bootstraps, with those correct tools, helpful tools, can improve their own housing situation. Also, we get rid of some of the inefficiencies of churn. If you have people who have mental health problems, substance abuse problems, that are in and out of housing, they're being evicted, it's incredibly inefficient. It's very costly for the landlord. There's a gap in time, even though there's huge demand. As soon as somebody's thrown out, somebody else is going to be there. But there's still some period of time that is lost there that is inefficient. And this, through services, I think might be able to make some dent on that. And then on the procedural issue, which I think is a very important one here, I think we've adequately plugged the hole, but it's not ideal. But the reality is that no one has, including Homefront, has said they need this time because they're going to come forward with a very specific proposal. And we get the general point, and it's a very legitimate one, but I don't see that it's likely that there's going to be a fundamental change in what we've heard today in the next 7 days, but we need to maintain an open mind, and I would encourage our city administrator to do that. Also, anybody who votes on the prevailing side could bring a motion for reconsideration as well, in case we do get some critically important information. And what will be very interesting on the issue of leverage, which is also a very important one, it's a little premature to cross that bridge because we don't have any applications in front of us. So the second step in this process will be to ask multiple organizations to bring proposals forward, and maybe there will emerge leverage at that point where we're putting forward a fairly small amount to their much larger new contribution, and it'll make a difference. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't promise that. So anyway, that's how I justify my intended vote, which is in favor. Councilmember Boyette, you also had your hand up.
You said it all.
Okay. That's because I went on too long. Councilmember Tariki.
Not necessarily. I think it's really, I agree with the mayor that the likelihood of someone coming up with a comment that's going to turn 3 or even 15 houses into the 1,000, if not thousands of houses that we need it's beyond my imagination. And frankly, if somebody can come up with something like that, then, they should be running for president, not sitting here advising us on what we should be doing right now. I think underlying all of this, so I understand understand about the timing and the comments and all that type of stuff, but I really do not see how there's going to be a comment that's going to change the basic economic reality of the situation and this specific grant from the federal government that we're looking at. Yes, this is a capital problem, and it is a capital problem because the middle class and the working class don't have the savings, the capital to build housing. That should be obvious to everybody that's in here. But one of the things that we don't think about is how that lack of capital has affected human capital, how it has affected human beings, and how so many people are having a hard, if not impossible time coping with the system, coping with the bureaucracy, navigating the way around in order to try to figure out how to dig their way out of this mess. I do not want to give money just to the existing organizations to keep doing what they're doing. No way. We need to be thinking innovatively. We need to be thinking creatively. We need to figure out how to use this $900,000 in order to build the capacity of those organizations to help the people that they need, and also, for that matter, to build the capital, whether it's, building up more public-private projects, or just making more money available, or more developers who jump into this area. The problem, we're not going to solve the problem by building 15 homes. We're going to solve the problem by changing the way we operate in our community and the way that we think about it. So I fully support where we're going with this proposal.
Thank you. Council, any other comments before we proceed to a vote? Okay, is the motion clear? Anybody want the motion restated? Okay, so we'll do a show of hands. If in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Voting in favor are Council members Gulick, Joy, Cole, Chariki, Boyette, Ripsis. If you're voting in opposition, please raise your hand. Voting in opposition, Council members Neese, Owen, Tidswell, and Purington. Motion passes 6-4. I believe that concludes item number 2. We're a little bit beyond our break time. Councilmember East, before we take a break.
Thank you, Mayor. Since public comment is ending on this, on the 20th, our work session, can we have an update on this, on the public comment that evening?
Sure, we can certainly verbalize anything and share forward on any comments we get.
Okay, that would be helpful. Just to that way, if there is anything that needs to be done, it would be done, started then at the end of the public comment instead of waiting until some other time.
And even before that, I'd recommend that if staff receives things that can be shared with the council, please do so, because a member of council might want to bring motion for reconsideration. So the sooner we get copied on things, the better.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody.
And actually, for the record, if somebody does come forward with something, I am happy to bring it back for reconsideration.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's 7:54. We'll take a break. We'll come back at 8 o'clock and continue with our last item on our agenda, item number 3.
I am. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'm happy to be here before you again to talk about Comanche Park. I know there are a few council members who were not here when we talked about the park improvement projects back in 2001. So I just want to do a really quick recap. So when the pandemic hit, HUD released allocations to the City of Billings for Community Development Block Grant Coronavirus. We call them CDBG CV funds. And we did a survey. The CD board prioritized those. We came to the city council. Those were approved. We developed an application process. We actually opened that twice. As the applications were approved and funding was allocated and moved forward, we realized we still had some funds. So parks amenities and improvements were one of the things that were eligible for CDBG CV funds. So CD staff, CD board members, and Parks Department members toured 8 low-income area parks and made a list of things that we could do with CV funds. So that's where we are to start this. So Comanche Park received some of those funds back in December of 2021. So some of the requirements are that it had to be used to prevent, prepare for, or respond to the coronavirus. It had to primarily benefit low-income individuals, and it couldn't be a duplication of services or support. Okay, so with that as the background, this is the Comanche Park Coronavirus Project. Next slide. So as the equipment failed at Comanche Park, Comanche is a park that came into the city in about 1968, I believe. It was developed as a park in 1970. And since then, as the equipment has failed, the Parks Department didn't have the money to replace the equipment, so they simply removed it. So that's all that's left of the playground equipment at Comanche Park. Next slide. So previously approved within that December of 21 project was a new playground pod, fall protection and new equipment, ADA accessible parking, and an accessible walkway to the playground. So the design work is done. The Parks Department issued an online survey to select the new equipment, and that equipment has been ordered, and that project should be complete by the end of September. Next slide. So the survey, this is the winning design for the new playground. So that's what will be going in at Comanche Park. Kind of cool looking, don't you think? Much better than what's there now. Next slide. So the Community Development Board, since we're putting money into the park with those amenities that we just talked about, the CD board realized that those streets surrounding Comanche Park were still gravel. They were muddy, they didn't drain very well. So they recommended that we look at paving the streets that are immediately adjacent to Comanche Park. So the city engineer's office has agreed to design, bid, and do contract administration for that project for a little under $80,000. Okay, next slide. So this is just an aerial view of Comanche Park. The top is an alleyway, so that will not be paved. And you can see the paving on South 12th Street West on the right-hand side, paves to about the middle of the park. Okay, next slide. So this is the area that will be paved for that $80,000. Next slide. So in listening to council discussions over the last few months, I've noticed that you're very interested in crime prevention through environmental design, CPTED improvements. So I reached out to Chief St. John and asked him if they would be willing to do a CPTED assessment on Comanche Park. So we've received that assessment in late January. Next slide. So the recommended amendments that we're proposing tonight would incorporate all of the recommendations that are in the CPTED assessment. So that means solar lighting for the playground pod, basketball area, and walkway, and solar lighting specifically so that we're not obligating the Parks Department to pay ongoing electrical fees for that lighting. Replacement of the basketball hoop, backboard, and net. Wayfinding signs to help people get to the park, because one of the things they noticed was nobody knows that park is there. So we'd set up some signs. And then park signs actually at the park. And then perimeter detail around the fruit tree to better define that area. and bollard or other fencing along the alley on the north side of the park, because if you looked at the pictures in the SEPTED assessment, people were actually driving on the lawn in the park. So that would eliminate that with the curbs and paving on the street. We hopefully will avoid that kind of thing. And then community art. And the estimate for those improvements at Comanche is $55,000. Next slide. So last Wednesday, I met with the Parks, Recreation, and Public Lands Board and went through the same presentation with them. They asked some very good questions. They were very excited, and they unanimously agreed to recommend the City Council approve the street paving and the SEPTED assessments, or improvements, excuse me. Next slide. So that's all there is. And I'm happy, thank you for your attention. And I know you've been sitting here for a while, so I'll try to answer your questions as I can.
Great, thank you for your patience. Questions, Councilmember Brown?
Tam, I love this project so much. So much. In fact, you should go back and tell everybody in community development that if they lead with SEPTED, I will support them in it. I think you've done a really tremendous job here, and I'm just wondering if this is going to continue to be the approach for other park projects.
I think it's a possibility. This project came together really well, and we had already had the CV funds, so staff time was already dedicated to this project, so adding this worked out well. Now, if we do it at other parks that aren't already part of projects, we may have to figure out how we're going to pay for staff time to do those kind of things. And you'll note that some of the parks guys are here in the back, that maybe they could address that specifically, but I know Brenda has already reached out to other departments to say, you know, we're interested in partnering with you, help us figure out how we can maybe do some of these things.
That's great. I love it.
Thank you very much. Other questions, comments? Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. I also like this as well, but I have some questions because I'm not sure. Can you pull up the slide with the streets that are being paved?
Sure.
And I kind of wish Public Works was here because this question is more a Public Works question on this. But so are the streets going to be fully on the South Plainview Street? That's going to be fully side to side. Is that where parking's going to go? How?
Right. It'll be on-street parking on all sides of the park other than the alley.
Okay, so it'll be parallel parking.
Yes.
Along there. And then is there any sidewalks?
No.
So we're going to have accessibility playgrounds, but no way to get to the playground?
My understanding is they're designing ramps to the sidewalk from the accessible parking spots so that they can go from the street onto the sidewalk to get to the playground.
But I thought you said there's no sidewalks.
The walkway that's interior in the park.
Oh, interior, okay.
Correct.
But there's not going to be sidewalks around the park?
Right. So I don't know how familiar you are with Plainview. Plainview, if you're heading west
I
on
am.
Central and you turn left on Plainview, it's that weird two parallel streets. We're talking about the East Street, and where the pavement ends is just before the park. So where the pavement ends now, it would be paved all the way to where the pavement ends on South 12th Street West.
Okay. And these are full widths of the street, correct? Okay. And so, but we're not going to, because Public Works is pretty adamant about putting sidewalks when we do streets. And so I'm surprised we're not seeing sidewalks put in here. Can we not require sidewalks to be put in?
Do you have a way to pay for the sidewalks?
Missing sidewalk program? That's
a question I can't answer. We would
Okay.
have to ask Public Works that question. We do not have the funds in CDBG or CDBG CV for sidewalks.
Okay. And I guess, Mary, one more question. I guess if we were going to do sidewalks on the opposite side of the streets, we have, I think, a storage facility to the south. An SID there would put sidewalks in on that side of the street. We have NXN1 property all to the east side, and so sidewalks would be put along there.
So the when I first contacted engineering about doing this paving, they sent out an SID inquiry to the streets on South 12th Street West that fronted the non-paved area and Kalmar Drive, and there was absolutely no interest in participating in an SID. So because my understanding is because they're not interested in participating in the SID, the Gravel Streets Fund cannot be used to assist with this project. So it's all going to come out of CDBG funds.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. I'll just comment, I drove by there last night about 9:45, and it's dark. There's, it's industrial to the south. There are no street lights. There aren't even house lights to kind of front where you could get some light. It's scary just driving by for sure. Councilmember Representative Councilmember Purington.
Thank you, Mayor. Tam, love the solar lighting in there. Did you talk to Debbie or somebody in Public Works about that already? I noticed you had some bids from Amazon.
Well, I looked, that was just a ballpark estimate to get us in the ballpark, so we knew kind of where we're heading. I think Mike Piggy has one of his guys that put solar light out by the new pond on the west end.
Conservation area.
Yeah, and they're very excited about how it is there, and he could speak to that if you have a specific question.
I did ask Debbie about that a few weeks ago before this ever came up. So I was excited to see it here. She said they were about $4,200 each. So I'm not sure if that included installation. I think you were in the $2,000 to $2,500 range. And then she was a little bit concerned about length of lighting period and not really having enough information yet, if that would cover the whole night or just part of the night, that kind of thing. But it's a great approach. Love what you're doing here. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
My understanding from, Mike made some comments at the Parks Board meeting last week, that the light actually dims, and then motion will set it back up to be higher. So it is lasting all night long. So my thought is, if maybe we don't need the 5 lights I have on there, maybe it's only 3 would cover those areas. So maybe we can still do it.
Great, thank you. And if I
sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is more, I guess, for Chris. I noticed in this report that Ponderosa Acres had 17 calls over a 4-week period for disturbing the peace. Are they on our nuisance list?
I do not know if they're on the nuisance list. I'll talk to the team.
Look into that. Thank you.
Councilor Purington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too like this project. I think it's a great project for the area. I am concerned, though, that whenever you ask Councilmember Neese, well, do you have the money to put in the sidewalks? Our residents ask that question all the time.
Right.
Do we have to pay for it? And so I am concerned that this is a park and there aren't sidewalks going to it or around it. I understand, I'm familiar with Plainview myself, but I'm just, I'm a little concerned about that. Well, not a little, I am concerned about it, and I would suppose that it is curb and gutter with those streets when they build them out.
The one thing that I will say is it's kind of at the end of those blocks, so there's not, unless you're going to the park, there's not a lot of other people in that area. The housing is a little bit farther to the south from there. So I'm all for sidewalks that would cut into the park, 5 foot or 6 foot into the park, and the park footprint would be less. I'm not opposed to the sidewalks. I just know we don't have CDBG or CV funds that could fund them.
Okay, thank you. Any further? Wyeth, do you want to comment? Sure.
Yeah, I just got some information actually from the city engineer, who just noted that if sidewalks were installed along Comanche Park, they would be assessed to the park because that's what's there. So in terms of that issue of, funding, that's where that comes from. You wouldn't be dealing with the neighbors, you'd be dealing with actually the park perimeter. So that was the thing that they were aware of when they went forward. So thanks.
Okay. Any further questions for Tam or Mike Pigg or Mike? Did you have anything? Your name was taken in vain a couple times there. I just want to make sure.
I don't have any additional comments unless somebody has a question.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. Then this is not a public hearing. Had an opportunity for public comment earlier on this item. So we'll just kick it back to staff. Staff, how do you want to proceed? Do we have a motion? Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I move we approve Comanche Park in, thank you, Mayor. I haven't got an agenda this evening. Thank you. I move to approve an increase in CDBG funding allocation to amend the Comanche Park Coronavirus Impact Project as recommended by CDB.
Okay, second, Councilmember Boyette. Any discussion? Councilmember Joy.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mayor and Council, and thank you, Mayor and Council, for making such great comments about this. One thing about the sidewalk, Kamar Drive, it really faces the back of storage units. You really can't go anywhere. But anyway, not addressing this, the sidewalk issue. This is an area that is in desperate need of a park that doesn't look scary. This park looks scary. And people say, well, not very many people go there. Well, do you want to go to a scary park? Not really. And there are lots of kids in this area. There are people who absolutely appreciate that this is a great park for them to go to. And I don't know, I might make it one of my new favorites and go there quite often myself. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Councilors, we'll proceed to a vote. The motion is for approval. Item number 3, consistent with the staff recommendation. If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. That concludes our regular agenda. We'll move to public comment on non-agenda items. So anything that was not on our agenda this evening, if you'd like to comment, appreciate your patience. Just tell us your name, address, and ask to keep your comments to 3 minutes.
Catherine Card, 2815 4th Avenue South. Councilwoman Owens brought, in her devotion, brought to our mind and gave us a call to be more like the Samaritan in caring for our neighbors and recognizing our neighbors in need, our neighbors who've been beaten up in one form or another and are lying on the ground or sitting on the steps, bleeding in a sense. Theological studies have a technique, and preaching does as well, of what's called inclusio. So you deal with an important subject like what Councilwoman Owen has brought to us, that call to do hands-on care. I'm going to form an inclusio with her comments to emphasize the importance of dealing particularly with the most vulnerable folks, neighbors, and your constituents who are on the streets, are being hurt, are vulnerable, and those are especially the unhoused. And the inclusio the piece of the inclusio that I want to do is invite you to hands-on care for your unhoused neighbors by volunteering at Shelter First, the very low barrier shelter that you funded. I'm inviting you to take a step closer and actually volunteer there at some point. 6:15 to about 8 o'clock each night is when we volunteers work. And we are hands-on. We make the beds, the cots, or the beds on the floor, put clean pillowcases on each pillow, put clean blankets down, lay mats down, and then walk with each person to their sleeping spot. Make sure they have enough blankets, make sure that they're as comfortable as we can make them with limitations. We provide, when they need help, we provide clean clothes, and we provide food, and we provide an atmosphere that is calming and welcoming to them and loving. It's hands-on though. And that's the big difference between the Samaritan and all these religious folks walking by, and others don't walk by. This is a really good opportunity that you put money into to really meet some of our neighbors who need your care. So I'm going to give this to Mr. Kukulski, and bless you. And I hope to see you volunteering there.
Catherine,
Thanks.
while we have you, and because others might be listening and probably would not want to just show up, who should they call or go online? That's on this piece of paper.
It's on that piece of paper, and they can, oh, yeah. That's, so Lita Pepione at hotmail.com. Lita's one of the managers of it. That can be, or on the website for billingsfirstchurch.org, and then subcategory volunteer and shelter first. It is, we only are able, as you know, to house 31 people, but it is a joy. It's hard work, but it's a joy. And even that little time to put people to bed.
Very good. Thank you.
Anyway.
So anybody, again, contact Lita,
Or you
L-I-T-A, Pepione, P-E-P-I-O-N, at hotmail.com, or call Billings First Church.
First Church.
And they'll hook you up.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks.
perfect. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Catherine, Councilmember Tricky? You had to...
I was just going to say that I also know that they recently put the volunteer opportunities onto justserve.org.
Oh, yeah, we were gonna do that, that's right, Just Serve. So, yeah, another way to do it. And you can always call me at 406-679-1501, Catherine Card. And I'll be glad to hook you up with Lisa Harmon or Lita. Thanks so much, you guys.
Thank you. Mr. Dunn.
Council, Mayor, thank you. My name is Wesley Dunn. I live on Dorothy Lane, Heights, Montana, 59105, Ward 1, 73 times. opclearinghouse@gmail.com. Jennifer, again, wonderful prayer. Thank you. Thank you very much. I do want to speak on the ARP and the HUD thing just real quick. I counted more yays than nays, so I am going to support this. It takes a lot of courage to get up here and speak in front of everybody. So, Jennifer, Roy, Pam, I share your concerns on that issue. But I'm for the people. So there was more people up here that were for it than against it, so I'm gonna support that. But I will say, bears are warm-blooded. So are humans. Stop feeding the bear. Okay. Mayor, Council, would you tell a child 73 times to do something or to not do something? In the real world, no. Why have we come to accept that telling a criminal 73 times to not put their hands on their weapon and get on the ground is okay? Like this is a normal procedure, and our law enforcement are applauded for it, for doing this. I'm telling you as a father, husband, and citizen, no, that is not okay. By asking a criminal 73 times to do as they're told, law enforcement is endangering many more lives and themselves. All the time, all the minutes that passes as these officers are asking this criminal to get on the ground. I understand a lot of factors play into situations as this, as how many witnesses there are with this situation, how many cell phone cameras are recording, etc., yada, yada, yada. 3 times is all you get. 3 strikes and you're out. Let's change the mindset of criminals. Let's play baseball, Montana.
Thank you.
Amber Dutton, Dorothy Lane. Let's talk about some other things like 73 times. Your city administrator said we have 1,000 employees that work for us, and it's important for all of them to work collaboratively. This is true, but are you all working together for the citizens or for yourselves? Are you even all on the same page? I ask this because who, if any of you, looked into the Avenue D Park incident that I told you about? Did the council members for that ward look into it? Did you all just take the chief of police's word and move on? Well, if all 1,000 public servants, as mentioned in the paper, were all on the same page, then that actually would have been investigated, and people would have been held accountable. Because I spoke to the supervisor who sat out there and waited with their employee who witnessed all of this go down while he waited on the cops, who never showed before the employees had to leave for the day. I know that St. John was dishonest when he came up here that day and spoke to you about the incident. I would never bring something to you without doing my own research first, because as I have proven to you multiple times, we have not lied. The chief tried to make us look like liars on many different things, in which I have proven we did not. So now I ask you why. Why are you not looking into these types of things? Conspiracies, cover-ups, and lies that are going on right here in your own city. Why are you not looking into the fact that all the percentages your police chief gave you were all going down, yet the news has so much to report on? Why is he only giving you selected crimes, his words? Where are the drug charges? Why are only certain crimes being presented to you? Why not all crimes? I and many other people do not understand how he keeps saying these stats are going down when crime has been on a rise for a while now. You may not like me saying this, but I and many others believe that he is being dishonest and only showing you percentages and stats that would back him up on what he wants us to think, us. Some of the public does not believe what he is telling us. So why? You ask. Well, because we can read. We can see all the constant articles proving that this crime is on the rise and not slowing down. As a famous song from the 90s goes, things that make you go,
Thank you. Any other public comment on anything that was not on our agenda this evening? Then we will, nobody's online, nobody's come forward, we'll close that portion of our meeting and move back to council. Council, any initiatives? Councilmember Owen, or I'm sorry, Councilmember Joy.
That's okay. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm not saying I am and I'm not prepared, but I would like to kind of plant the idea that I could bring an initiative forward as the legislative session comes to an end, that there be kind of a redistribution of council members, because we'd love to have some council members come to local affairs if they're no longer busy with the legislature. So that isn't an initiative, but I'd like to plant the idea in your head. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Consider it planted.
Oh, thank you.
Councilmember Chiriki.
Oh my gosh.
So we're going to fix all the transportation problems tonight as well. I should have gotten staff involved in this problem a while ago. We are up against a couple of really short deadlines let me put it this way. Let me back up. The rail line running through Billings will potentially be available to have passenger trains on it in the near future. It is something that was funded in the infrastructure bill, and the process is currently underway. There's an organization here in Montana called the Big Sky Rail Authority, Passenger Rail Authority, and the members of that organization include every county along the southern tier of Montana, except for Yellowstone County. So us being the biggest major stop that would be on there, I believe that the city of Billings needs to figure out how to step up and find a way to show that we support this. So I just handed to council the next immediate steps that are being suggested that we can do to help support this. The first one is that on the 17th of March, which is this Friday, the comment period is ending for the process, which is going to prioritize which rail lines are going to be have passenger rail added to it first. So the basic criteria is that it has to be an existing rail line that is currently being used but not for passenger route, and that the Amtrak was using for a passenger route in the past. So one of those lines is what is called the North Coast Hiawatha line, which is the one that runs from Chicago through Billings and over to Spokane and then Seattle. So by Friday, we need to get comments in supporting the prioritization of that route. So what I did was to write a letter, and Mayor Cole actually rewrote that letter and made some changes to it. Did you catch the date mistake that I made on there? No, he didn't. Thank you. Who found it? Somebody found I wrote it, I said 2022, not 2023. So this is basically individual members of council can sign it. It will not be an act of the council. It will not be an act of the city. So that's the first thing that we have going on there. I think that the way to coordinate that will be everybody just kind of signs their own one, and we'll compile them, and I'll submit them into the comment thing. The next thing that has to happen is called the corridor ID. Essentially what that is an official recognition of the project by the Federal Railway Administration. This one gets a little more complicated because what they want us to do is to have the MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization for our region, step up and support it. The problem is that that is half county and half city, and also just in terms of timing and stuff like that, it would be hard to hit the specific deadline that they want to do with that. What I want to do tonight is, well, the other thing that I wanted to put in people's minds going forward is that the one commitment that the city of Billings would have to make financially would be to upgrade the depot so that it was able to manage passengers going on and off as they stop here in Billings. So I believe we own the depot, right? Yes, we own the depot. So it would just be a question of whatever amenities need to be added in there in order to take on and off, the one eastbound and one westbound train every day. So what I would like to do tonight is to ask council to, how do I want to put this? Ask council to direct staff to look into how the city of Billings can help to move this project forward. And Wyeth, if you want to make any comments, you're more than welcome to come up here and not whisper. And City Attorney Kukulski's here. Thank you.
Thanks, yeah, Councilmember Shariki and Mayor and Council. And I guess I'm not sure, I don't want to jump the gun here in terms of your discussion, but I just wanted to, the part that, and you shared this with me just before the meeting in terms of kind of the different steps here. I guess just real quick, the PCC, Policy Coordinating Committee, which makes final decision recommendations for the MPO, as Councilmember Shariki said, they meet next Tuesday. Certainly this can be a topic on an agenda. There's nothing, no problem to do that at some point. Obviously, that's too late for this initial conversation. And that PCC is actually made up of the Planning Board, the City Council, the Board of County Commissioners, and then MDT, who obviously MDT's already weighed in on this whole thing. So that's kind of moot for our standpoint. I just wanted to clarify that if from an MPO involvement standpoint going forward, we would want to, when you're talking about kind of directing staff, and I don't, that could be more than the MPO staff, obviously, but we would need to coordinate then so that basically right now, like in our work program with the MPO for the current year we're in, we don't have this programmed, but we'll be doing a new work program that will come to the council and the PCC ultimately later this fall or late summer, early fall. So if we wanted to move something and recognize something in there that then would provide some, not just funding, but just direction in terms of this is something we're going to do, that would be the place to plug it in from the MPO standpoint. Versus, like right now, we don't have that set up. And obviously then we could follow up with Missoula, who's an MPO, and find out kind of what they're doing. So I just want to mention that in terms of short-term, long-term, that's something we could plan to anticipate for the next work program. And then at any time, obviously, and I think Scott Walker, our Transportation Planning Coordinator, emailed this earlier, yeah, we could have a discussion at the PCC about this, and the commissioners would be part of that discussion. So thanks for right now.
Yeah, so that's kind of why, I apologize. I should have started this ball rolling a long time ago, but at this point, I think what Wyeth is saying is that if the council expressed an interest in moving this forward, that's pretty much all we can do tonight, other than individually signing the letter that the mayor rewrote. So,
maybe I'll comment on a few of those things, may I?
Absolutely.
Okay, so just trying to clarify in my own mind. So the corridor ID program letter that has to go through the MPO, or the planning organization, Metropolitan Planning Organization, the PCC will not meet until the day after this is due. And even if we had plenty of time, my personal recommendation would be not to try to push the PCC on a rough schedule, because it's too important, and better that it come in a orderly fashion. And that's just because it's a good idea, but it's also important politically, because as I think everybody here knows, about 2 years ago, the county commissioners had the option of getting on board the train, so to speak, and chose not to do that. And their main concern was cost and the likelihood that this was never going to happen. It was a waste of their time and staff's time. Since then, a lot of things have changed. Although at the time I fully understood that position, what's changed is federal money. And that has put this route on the list of possible routes. And that's a total game changer, as well as possible money for track improvement. So I'm hoping that other counties will go back to Yellowstone County and have that conversation. But in any event, I think what we do is nothing with this letter dealing with corridor ID. So then as for the other letter, right before our meeting today, I handed out copies and also emailed copies, some slight modifications that I would recommend to this letter that soften it, where I thought it was an excellent letter, but it basically put anybody who signed it on track for supporting this forever. And, but I think the reality is there's a lot of unknowns. We don't know where federal dollars are going to come. We don't know what our ability to rehab the depot would be, what it would cost. Maybe we need the depot for other things. Lots of unknowns. So, but it's still a good idea, I think, if it could happen. And so, anyway, I changed that first sentence to say that we support, anybody who signs it, support the full support of individual members, not speaking for the city, but individual members' efforts to actively investigate the restoration of passenger rail service, with the idea that that way the letter couldn't be put in front of my nose later and said, you said, just trying to provide a little bit of flexibility, and you'll see that kind of changes elsewhere in the letter. So, Councilmember Tricky, let me just clarify. Are you asking that people contact you to sign one letter, or are you saying you've got a model in front of you, just work it as you want, to say whatever you want, and send it off as an individual, presumably identifying yourself as a member of the city council, but being careful not to say that you speak for the city or for the entire council?
I'm fine with either of those. My original intention and why I wrote everyone's name on that version of it was just whoever felt that they were okay with signing it, they could just email me a signed version of that page, and I would compile them and send it off before the end of the week. Otherwise, we could leave a copy like in City Hall or something like that, and people could come by and do that. But that was my intention. If people want to send it themselves, I have no problem with that.
Okay. Why don't, just for clarity's purposes, unless Councilmember Joy is going to disagree with this, why don't I make a cleaner version of what you've seen here today, and then people can do exactly what Councilmember Tricky said, append your name to it. On the other hand, if you see something you would like to tailor, then do it yourself, and then you can generate your own letter. But the default will be this group letter, and of course people are free to sign it or free not to sign it. Does that work as a plan?
That works.
Councilmember Joy.
Thank you. You did that already. It's done.
Okay. And then the last thing is you were also looking for some direction to staff to do something more. Is that something you want to do tonight, or just come back at a later date with a greater level of specificity?
I think, yeah. So Director Friday basically laid out what the next step of involvement would be for the city, and that would basically be to go through the process of getting the MPO involved in the process. Which would come up in the fall when we review the federal dollars that are there. So I'm fine with, seeing if we have the support for that tonight, or we can continue to talk about it some more as well. I'd be happy to hear what other people think at this point.
Okay, we'll have a dialogue, and at some point we'll ask staff if they're on board with this or not. Councilmember Neese.
Mayor, I would say I heard about this several years ago, and I think, like the county commissioners, I said this is not going to happen, there's no money, and I was like, oh, no way. It would be nice, but there's no way. And I've traveled Amtrak. I love traveling on the train. I don't know how many of you guys have done that before, but it's actually a great way to travel. And so I would love to see something like this come. And so, yes, I'm interested in pursuing to take a look to see what it would be like, but I am concerned about the cost. I'm concerned making sure we don't, I think we work well with the railroad company, because we also have our Fifth Street project that I don't want to jeopardize. They own the same lines. And so I think that, going forward with something like this would be okay. But I do know that, it's all federal dollars. If those dry up with the next administration, the whole project gets set back. And so I am a little concerned about it not coming to fruition in the past. I don't want to waste a lot of staff times. I maybe don't want to get it on the MPO if it's not really what needs to be done. But at the same time, I think we should look forward to maybe trying to move this forward a little bit to see what it entails. And so I have no problem with having the staff or having initiative to investigate this further, through the process.
Councilmember Treaky, following up Councilmember Neese's suggestion that staff move this forward a little bit, or whatever the equivalent, would it be appropriate to ask staff, if the majority of the council agrees, to ask to set up presumably a Zoom conference with David Strohmeyer, the Missoula County Commissioner, who has been driving this effort and is head of the rail authority, the state rail authority, to educate us a little bit. And then after that, we can make a decision about whether to move forward or not.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay, Councilmember Neese, you're nodding your head. Councilmember Gulick?
So I'm very supportive of this. I guess I have a question for Director Friday. I'm a member of the steering committee for the long-range transportation plan, and transportation dollars is one area where we do have lots of resources for our planning staff. It's the only area, really. But Wyeth, in terms of staff doing something to help council, this council or future councils understand the feasibility and what the costs would be involved. I mean, is that something that our transportation planning staff can do within the processes of our existing, like the long-range transportation plan, or are there other ways as well that we have some resources for our staff to look into this further?
Councilmember Gulick and Mayor and Council, my understanding of what our abilities are really would be tied to something that's put into our work program for the MPO and do it that way. And I'm pretty sure from our limited conversations, and again, we would want to visit further with Missoula, who's already done some things in their MPO with this, to understand what's possible. But clearly there's some options where the MDT and federal highways is okay with certain things being programmed for this effort. So yeah, that would be the place to go. I mean, for us to say that's something we want to consider as one of the items to start working on in the work program and get that forward to bring it to you this fall for that, or like I said, late summer for consideration in the program. Our federal fiscal year is October, so we would be putting that together late summer and bringing it to you in advance of that. So that'd be my recommendation of where it would go. And then obviously if there's other staff involvement across the city or whatnot, we would have that, the city administrator would be directing us on kind of how that would work too,
So Wyeth and Chris, would you have any problem with working to arrange something with David Strohmeyer to bring him here either in person or electronically to educate us on the whole project?
Happy to find a work session if the council would like to have that conversation.
Okay. Okay. Does anybody want to make a motion? I'll make a motion to that effect. That we just direct staff to take that next step to connect us with David Strohmeyer. If he could provide some written documentation in advance, that would probably be good too. And then we can see where to go from there. Made and seconded. Any discussion? Okay. If in favor of that motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay.
Nay.
Okay, so motion passes. Councilmember Purington voting in opposition, but I believe everybody else voted in favor, so that passes. Anything else before we adjourn? Don't see anything. Thank you, everybody. Safe travels home.
It's only 8 o'clock.